Hello and welcome to Talking Bird. I'm your host, Robert Zachary. I'm back. I think I threatened I was coming back, but if you're new to this show, then you don't know what I'm talking about, and if you're not, you know what I'm talking about. Change in topic. That's a thing that we've done only twice before, but this isn't going to be like the topic we're going to have every week, but this week's topic, and we're not going to be here next week, but you know what I mean. I met up with comic book artist Sean Judy, and we talked about kind of our collective affection for the work of Glenn Danzig, the punk pioneer with the Misfits, and as a solo artist and as a comic book company owner and whatnot. Anyway, we had a long discussion. It was kind of just a freewheeling thing. It's not an encyclopedic breakdown of the man's entire career, but I thought it was a lot of fun. At least I had a lot of fun being a part of it, and I hope you enjoy it. Just some show notes. Sound quality. I'm still trying out this two people in the same room thing, so I don't know if it's up to the snuff I would like, but it is. I think it's listenable. Anyway, if you want to check out Sean's comic work, he draws a book called Pax Serpentis, and that is put out by Prometheus's Fire Publishing. And you can find them on Facebook. You can find him on Twitter, and he could probably tell you how to get an issue of his comic at the Sean Judy. And I'm sure he'd be happy to help you. And let's have some fun. Let's listen. Thanks for listening.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanations, but not necessarily the only ones, to the mysteries we will examine.
Glenn Danzig is our topic today. Glenn Alan Anzalone. It's got to be Anzalone. Because he's Italian, right?
He's Italian, Scottish, I believe. He's a mixed bag. He's a mutt.
He's a mutt.
But he definitely has the Italian last name. And he's from Jersey, so when he talks, he sounds like he's a cast member of Jersey Shore.
I was thinking about this the other day. Like, if The Sopranos still ran, he'd have been perfect. Because he's getting to that, we're jumping ahead, but he's like 62 now, and he's totally starting to look like the guys that would just show up in those later seasons of The Sopranos and be like, that guy's such a psycho. And then you find out, like, oh, that's Frankie Valli from Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
Yeah, right.
Or, it's like, what? It's like, oh, that guy? He used to, sing for,
He used to be a rock star.
Yeah, exactly.
Now he's a bagman for the Bada Bing.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of funny, maybe because he doesn't live in New Jersey or something, he's not considered Jersey royalty, that he never showed up on The Sopranos, or at least on the soundtrack or something like that.
Well, where does he live now? Because I know his big, creepy craftsman home in L.A. or whatever has been abandoned for years.
Yeah, so I looked that up yesterday. So he's got a house in Los Feliz, and it was listed at $1.2 million.
Still full of trash.
Yeah, full of trash, broken toys.
And the same pile of bricks in the front yard that got him kicked out of the neighborhood or whatever.
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, the funny thing is that thanks to technology, nobody's secrets, even the great dark one himself, Glenn Danzig, is away from our eyes. Is they found out he only paid like $240,000 for it in like 1988 or 89 or something like that. But yeah, it didn't sell. It's off the market. So yeah, it makes me wonder. It's like, does he not live in LA anymore? Does he, does he just have I guess at that price, if you're just paying the taxes, it doesn't really matter. But it's a pretty normal bungalow looking type house, but it just doesn't look like he has the neighbor kid mow the lawn or anything.
Well, and again, one of the things that we'll be dealing with a lot on this is secondhand stories and apocrypha, but from what I've understood and what I've read about that whole situation is he had it kept up while he was on tour and other things like that. But then apparently there was like this pile of bricks in the yard that something was being taken down or replaced or whatever, and the neighbors got up in arms about it, and he basically did the full Danzig and said, fuck you guys, and he stopped mowing his lawn, and he stopped taking care of the place, and eventually he moved out of it. But he did it to put a blight on the neighborhood, which is really funny because when you go and you look at his like episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, where he's like, "Yo, I want the house with the bloody walls and all that stuff." Like it's almost like a play on. I mean, obviously it's a play on himself, and he's making fun of himself, but it's a little bit on the nose for reality because he let that house go to shit because he wanted to piss off the neighbors because how dare they talk to the Dark Lord about trimming his hedges? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, is he really that bad of a neighbor? I mean, it's like, God, what an a-hole. But
well, yeah, I think he is. But
yeah, it's like I don't know what the pitfalls of living next to a minor rock star. I mean, I don't mean to insult him. As we'll get into it later, you know, we've obviously done our time with the Dark One. But yeah, it's that kind of idea of like, well, he's kind of washed up. I was watching a clip of him on MTV from the early 90s, back when Ricky Rackman was the
Ricky
host.
Rackman, yeah.
This is before he cut his hair too, even.
Ooh.
And he had like, I guess he did this like in 93 and 94, or maybe it was 94 and 95, where he would have Danzig on every Halloween and kind of interview him. And it was like, one, it looked like they'd never spoken before the cameras rolled. Because they would just like, he'd ask him a question and then it would just get like stony silence. And he'd be like, "Hey Glenn, what do you think about seeing all these Misfits shirts around?" And he'd be like, "I don't want to talk about it." It's like, and that's like it's a recurring theme. If you go on YouTube and you look up like a Danzig interview, invariably somebody's going to ask you a question, and invariably he's going to be, "I don't want to talk about it."
Yep. Because
he was even on, gosh, I think this was 2009. I saw him on. I was watching a clip of him on Red Eye with Greg Gutfield back when he was the host. And he was like, it was an interesting interview because I had seen a clip of it before, and I thought, oh, this is going to be where I'm going to get to watch him unload politically. He doesn't talk politics. He actually just kind of mumbles his way through the interview, but Gutfield kind of goes at this weird angle where he's like, "Man, you're looking good. What do you do to take care of yourself?" And I mean, you're going to have to Google it. You're not looking that good.
No.
And it was like, "What do you eat?" He goes, "I just like try to eat like healthy.
And he doesn't expand on it.
I don't eat crap. I haven't eaten pork in like 20 years."
Because I'm a Muslim terrorist.
Exactly. It's like
what?
What? I don't know. It's like, what? I would have loved to have heard his reasoning against like pork of all things. Like, that's the secret? It's dietary.
The other white meat is bad for you?
The other white meat?
What?
Well, he even admitted in this interview, this is 2009, that he goes like, "So do you like, are you just like," and he goes, "You're like a guy who's at the gym all the time." And he's like, "No, I don't work out."
Oh, right. Yeah.
But the funny
Glenn
thing
doesn't work out.
But the funny thing is this is kind of like the post-workout Danzig. So yeah, in some ways he
still does arms though.
Oh, he probably has to do a little bit of arms,
because the belly and the chesticles are getting pretty big. So it's like he's got to at least keep the arms proportionate. Maybe when he's sitting on the couch watching anime. I don't know. I mean, he's curling. He's doing curls.
Curling. That's all he
does.
He's like, he's got little spindly legs, which he does.
Yep. Well, he's 3.5 feet tall too. I mean,
he's 3.5 feet.
He's fun size, devil.
I feel like we've impugned the old man. We should talk about the young man.
That's true.
There's not a lot to know about. There's not a lot about him, about his early days, except that he was involved in bands in New Jersey, and he kind of was in a lot of Black Sabbath cover bands and R&B, like rock R&B type stuff. I guess he said his first kind of musical gig was a roadie for another band.
That is true.
But this is what he said in the interview. He said he peed all over the guy's drums and quit the band. And then the guy goes, "Yeah, I heard that like pissing on cymbals really messes them up." Which is a thing that like kind of almost put me on a different tangent of like, I had no idea that there was a urinating on a drum cymbals did anything to them.
Apparently, if your pH is off, man, it screws up the metal.
Completely.
Right? That's right.
It has a weird overtone that I don't like. But now he formed the Misfits in what? Mid 70s, 76, 77?
It was like 76 or 77. I mean, the traditional reference is 77. I think that's when they first started recording, or first started as a group. I mean, all of the 40th anniversary merchandise that came out in 2017 would corroborate that, but I don't know exactly how long they were together as a band before they started recording, but the Cough Cool single came out, I believe, in 78.
Okay.
Which was the first Misfits recording where you had Glenn playing synth and singing, and it was all very pizza and pipes, over the top, keyboardy.
Yeah, that was a weird kind of revelation, because I'd never heard that early stuff, and then I got the box set, and then to realize that he was kind of like, he took his piano lessons or whatever at some point and plugged a Fender Rhodes into a fuzz pedal. Even though I think he kind of disavows that stuff now, because it's not a...
I don't know how much, though. He may not talk about it, but if you actually go and you look at liner notes, even on the most recent album, it says piano, keyboards, and I mean, but he doesn't, you're right, he doesn't really talk about it. He doesn't talk about the fact that he was classically trained, and I use air quotes, on the clarinet and the piano when he was, growing up, and that, he really wanted to be a photographer, not a musician, but, he does embrace some of that. And I think that part of it, in his overarching trajectory as an artist, where he does a lot of his own stuff in the studio, and then he goes and finds a band to play and back him up on tour. I think that maybe that's rooted in the fact that he could, like a lot of people do now, you can be in your basement and record with a keyboard and a microphone, and you can make music, and it sounds mostly like a song, instead of like, oh, I'm here with my clarinet trying to play Sabbath covers,
right.
So,
well, I had heard that later on in interviews that, because I assumed like the Misfits, they were just like a band, and back then, 20, 30 years ago when I first started listening to them, there weren't books about those guys. They were just kind of like, everything you knew about them was from t-shirts and from album covers, and there wasn't a lot of information there. I just assumed it had been a whole, the same band, which I didn't. Years later, obviously, I realized, there'd been several lineups, but
there's quite a few drummers.
He claimed that he played most of the guitar parts on the records. Now, who knows? Again, it might be apocrypha, because these guys are constantly the old Misfits
suing
guys,
each other.
Yeah, they're suing each other. Yeah. They're trying to jockey for position in the grand pantheon of rock history. Although I don't ever think we're gonna have a day where they're gonna play the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But you never know. But yeah, it's like he said he played all the guitar on the Sam Hain records and most of it on the Misfits. But that early lineup, though, it's like he had was it Bobby Steele? Was he the guitar player for that?
He was one of the original guitarists for the Misfits, I think. And he left, and they replaced him with Jerry's younger brother, who ultimately became known as Doyle Wolfgang von Frankenstein. But so he was, and then there was like Robo was the original drummer, and he went off to play with
Black Flag.
Yeah. Right, and then there was Mr. Jim, who was the drummer for a while. They went through several drummers.
And there was Arthur Gougey or whatever. Goolsby, is that what it is?
No, wait,
there was an Arthur something with the... I was reading about it today, but I was like, I think he would only been on very, very early.
Right, because Goolsby is the bassist for Gorgeous Frankenstein.
Oh, maybe I'm thinking, well, man, I thought I had it written down, but
that's
yeah.
Cool.
But it's
suffice it to say that all of Danzig's bands gone through multiple lineup changes, and he's the the one constant.
Well, I would also say that he's probably the artistic thrust that kind of goes through the whole. He acts like because there's been legal issues, and now the Misfits are kind of a separate entity. Although I think as of late is this reunion called the Misfits?
Well, yeah. So the Misfits. So to kind of step back here for a second, Glenn Misfits in the early '80s, he started to step away from the band, and there's multiple stories about that. But basically, he said, "I'm done with the Misfits. I'm doing this new thing called Sam Hain Samhain, whatever." And so the guys who were, Doyle and Jerry and whoever the drummer was at the time were like, "Oh, that's cool, Glenn. You can go do your own thing. We're going to keep playing as the Misfits," and that's where all the legal stuff started to happen, and it became clear that they didn't really have any legal creative control over the band because Glenn had copyrighted everything in his name. They went to court and they fought it for years, and they finally won the right to perform as the Misfits and use the imagery and the logo in, I want to say 94, 95. I think maybe 95 is when they won the case, and they actually put out the American Psycho album, the Misfits did, in 96 on Geffen Records. Okay. And that was the big reunion. They did a big reunion tour. I remember I saw that show up in Seattle, and actually Anthrax opened for them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. I want to say it was at the Off-Ramp. Or Rock Candy. I forget. Well, anyway, but
that's interesting. Yeah. It's kind of like Anthrax is on the... It's like the Misfits were on the rising again, and the Anthrax is kind of on the way down.
Yeah, and it was really strange. I mean, it was very strange because, obviously, we're around the same age in that whole era where Anthrax and Metallica, Megadeth, all those big-name arena rock metal bands, and now, they're going around opening for a resurgent, reformed 70s punk band that only has 2 of the 4 original members in it, and that was when Michael Graves, came on to sing and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, so the Misfits still play as the Misfits, and they still put out albums, and they still tour, but they have turned into sort of the punk supergroup.
Right.
Because they've got, they had Dee Scadina from Black Flag, they had Robo for a while.
They have Marky Ramone from the Ramones.
Yeah, the Ramones.
And his Pasta Sauce.
Yeah, so, and then they've had they've had different frontmen, singer-wise, and then Jerry took over the singing, and he's okay. It's this really weird web of people dropping in and out of these bands and trading off, and guys, the Misfits broke up kind of for a while, and it was really only Jerry. He was the only guy who's been in the band the whole time. The bassist, Jerry only. And it's interesting to me because, even his brother got mad at him and left and, formed Gorgeous Frankenstein, which is absolutely horrid. If you ever listen to their albums, it's terrible. But and that goes into the whole wrestling thing. We can talk about that later. But
I don't know much about that, but I'll be interested to hear that.
Well, so the Gorgeous comes from his wife. So Doyle von Frankenstein.
Right.
He married this wrestler lady, Gorgeous something,
or
something gorgeous or whatever. Some, 6.5 foot tall blonde lady with, fake everything. And so she is the official go-go dancer for the band. If you look at the liner notes,
it's important to have an official go-go dancer.
Right. So she doesn't even do anything in the band. She doesn't play an instrument. She doesn't even sing backup. She just dances on stage and, generally looks hot for the audience. But they met back when the Misfits were actually wrestling. So they wrestled for a while. And that was in the 90s. And I think it was with Sting. Because he had the face paint and they had the face paint.
For half a second, I'm thinking, when did the guy from the Police?
No, not Sting, not Fade Road.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. No. I don't know wrestling.
No, I don't. So,
I jumped off in sometime in the mid '80s or something.
Yes, I fell off when Sergeant Slaughter became a bad guy. Okay,
oh yeah,
that was the end of my.
I think that's about the time I did too.
But no, I found it interesting because there was, they would show up in the wrestling magazines and there was all these stuff. And at the time, again, this is right around the birth of the internet. So it's pre-digital age in a way. So the only way, like you say, the only way you get information about these people is T-shirts and trade mags. And so finding Misfit stuff was cool. And so you read these Wrestling Federation magazines and all these scary pictures of them, and with their faces painted as the skulls and stuff. But he wound up meeting her through that. So then he formed this other band, and it's this random cross-cultural deal. And now they're all back together. Everybody's friends again because there's been reunion tours. At least they're friends again for 20 minutes.
Right.
Danzig, after 30 years of saying, F you guys.
Fuck those guys.
Right? I don't want to, I don't want to talk about it. Like all that stuff. Right. He gets back together with Doyle.
Yeah,
and Jerry, and then some other drummer that they could
again,
find.
It's not a true reunion because
Right.
there's always some drummer that it's some guy who's a little bit younger and he can hit the skins a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think a lot of times when bands reunite, that's the guy who gets shafted. It's because that's the first thing that's hard to do when you get older. But yeah, I think the weird thing about if I think about Danzig and the way I viewed him back in the day. And the way I viewed the Misfits compared to like when Danzig's doing his solo stuff and the Misfits reunited, it was like they took I guess I missed a lot because there weren't videos and there weren't articles, because by the time I was into them they were already broken up and he was off getting ready to do Danzig, that I didn't know much about them, so I always kind of equated them being a lot darker than they really were. So I missed the whole idea that they're like, obviously there's little bits of little camp and stuff, but the first album I really glommed onto with them was Walk Among Us, which is kind of like a 4 on the floor right through the thing. There's not a lot of, it's just really fast. They're almost getting into hardcore by that point. So I always kind of established them as being kind of more of like, they're just really dark. They're really dark, but this whole idea of like, oh, we're wearing makeup, we're doing the devil lock, we've got like the bass that looks like you could slice a ham with the headstock or something like when I would start to see that stuff, it was kind of like, it was the first little thing where I'm like, oh, there's like supposed to be a sense of humor here, where it was like,
or at least a theme or a shtick. It was like almost the anti-Kiss in a way.
Yeah, and it was and I didn't really realize that. And in some ways, and I'll bring this up again because that was another thing about him specifically, was as time went on, I almost felt like it was almost like it like took the excitement out of it in some respects, because I kind of liked the darkness of it all, and to realize like when Michael Graves and I have to realize that when it comes to bands, I'm a bit more conservative than I ever want to think I am, where I'm like, if it's not like the whole, if it's like a reunion and it's not like most of the group, like I don't give a crap. It's like I didn't go see Van Halen when they reunited because this is embarrassing to even admit, I was pissed that they fired Michael Anthony, the guy that only plays generally one note on the bass and everything. But it was like, that's
the
not
worst
a reunion.
bassist ever.
Yeah,
he's still mad he's not there. Right?
He's terrible. But it's like, that's not a reunion when it's your son. That's a reformation.
Oh, like Zeppelin?
Yeah. And I never got into that either. But that's kind of like, so when Michael Graves took over, and it's like, I don't want to pick on Michael Graves, especially since I guess you say you're actually kind of a fan of that era of the band.
I'm a fan of it. And I actually like Graves. Graves, after he left the Misfits, and that's a whole other interesting story. But he went out and did a solo career, and his Punk Rock is Dead, and there's another album. His first 2 solo albums are some really fantastic punk. And the great thing about it, and this might upset some listeners, but he's actually a politically conservative guy. Michael Graves is. Okay. And he left the Misfits actually to join the Marine Corps.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I think is this whole 9/11 kind of era. It might be a little bit off, but he felt compelled to join the military, and so he went off and did his service, and then got out and started going out, and he formed this sort of like conservative punk league. Like it was like people who love America but still like to rock or whatever. Right? Like it was this really weird thing, but the subversive nature of his punk that he put out on the solo career is hilarious, because he's using the punk genre, which is entirely anti-establishment to begin with, right? And he's singing a lot about stuff basically like, kids, get your smartphones out of your face, and, like all this kind of stuff. But it doesn't come across that way. Like,
right.
It's almost like when you find out your band is like actually a Christian band, and you get mad because you like the music, and you're like, I don't want to be preached at, like, And it's the same thing. Like, I love the music and it's great, but some of the messaging on it is really kind of humorous. It's like, here's a guy with face paint, calls himself the Scarecrow Man, right? he's got tattoos of like stitching to make him look like a mummy, right? And he's up there telling you about how you're a loser because you can't put your smartphone down. I'm like, I love this guy, right? I love him. Anyway, but I do enjoy that.
That's a whole nother. Gosh, a person could probably, and I can only think of two now that you've named him. I was thinking of Jason Everman, who people might not remember, but he was kind of in the Seattle scene briefly as the fourth member, the rhythm guitar player of Nirvana, but he's the guy basically...
the fifth Beatle, basically.
Right, he basically paid for the recording, and they put him on the album cover, but he doesn't play on it. He's credited. And then later he left the group, and he joined Soundgarden because Hiro Yamamoto, the bass player, he quit. The minute the Soundgarden became famous, he goes, nope, I'm out of this. So he quit. And then Jason Everman joined, and then they toured one tour, and it didn't go well, and he left, and then that's when Ben Shepherd came in. But apparently he tried a few bands, but he kind of got sick of the industry, and he became a ranger in the U.S. Army. And he went to Afghanistan. Actually, I think maybe the New York Times or somebody, you can look for it. There's an interesting profile, but it's kind of an interesting, I don't know how punk he was, and I don't really know his political views, but it is kind of a thing where it's like, they're like, I'm tired with music, I'm going to go join the military. Which is
such a random thing. You're like, I'm tired of music, I'm going to try art or maybe photography or whatever. No, I'm going to go join the elite special forces group.
It would be kind of like if, and since we should probably dovetail back to our main thrust of our topic, that, what if Glenn left the Misfits and then he's like, yeah, I want to be a Marine now. It's like, well, one, Glenn, you're 5'3". Right. You're not tall. I don't actually know what they have height restrictions, but
he probably could work in a submarine. Join the Navy.
Yeah. I'm the only guy here that never hits my head. That's right. It's like they call me Shorty. I'm gonna get him.
We'll get him. Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, and since we're jumping around, I might as well just jump into maybe it'd be interesting to talk about kind of our first experiences with this kind of stuff, because I feel because it's October. I don't think that's a spoiler. Hopefully this gets released in October, and
3 days left.
I can't. I always equate this time of the year with Misfits music, Danzig music.
It's true,
and my vector, I guess is what you say, through the Misfits was probably 98% of people was through the band Metallica and their cover of Last Caress, Green Hell. That was when I got that Metallica, gosh, I was a freshman. Freshman in high school. I mean, it was the perfect storm because it played into this whole thing where it's like, economically you could get the tape for under $6 when everything was super expensive, and it was raw, and it was and it ends off with that incredibly insane lyric that, for a kid who is listening to Van Halen and Motley Crue and Wasp and stuff like that, which, yes, they have provocative lyrics, but they literally, I heard something to say, I raped your mother today, and you're just like,
it doesn't matter much to me as long as she's spread.
Yeah, and it's okay. Yep. Yes,
it's pretty hardcore shit.
In retrospect, that is it's hard to 30 years on to be like, isn't that an inspirational lyric? But it's transgressive, which is a thing that, this is maybe pre-PMRC, and kind of, you're a little kid, it's not that you want to go out and do these things, but just the idea that people are, was like Martin Lawrence talking dirty after midnight kind of idea of these kind of crazy, the horror and stuff. And so you hear this and you immediately, at that time, Metallica was very, I think to this day, they're still very good about putting out what they liked. And that was for pre-internet, not having a good radio station in your hometown, and frankly, not having good friends that knew anything about music.
Right.
So it's like everything you're collecting is just the little threads and bits and bobs you can put together. This band, this Misfits, which had the iconic Crimson Skull logo that Cliff Burton, the late bass player of Metallica, would wear that shirt. And
even
then
had the tattoo.
Yeah, had the tattoo on his upper arm. I mean, this is like obviously, to me before then, when somebody would say like, "Oh, punk rock," I would just equate that with like garbage. I wouldn't like if you told me like, "What kind of music?" Like, punk. I'd be like, "No, thanks. I'm not interested," because I thought punk rock was all about tricking people. And this is I'll try to condense this.
That was a very Sex Pistol-y kind of thing.
Well,
right, because it was people who didn't know how to play instruments, who were out there, again, being anti-establishment and bucking the trend and not being polished and going the exact opposite of studio rock or whatever.
Right.
Punk did feel at a time, it was like, well, that's what everybody does before they get good.
Right. Yeah. And then even so, like, do you remember Sigue Sigue Sputnik?
Yes.
And that was a thing, because I remember watching, it was Nightline or something as a kid, because I think Sigue Sigue Sputnik was a Malcolm McLaren production. It was his newest scam, and he's obviously the guy that started the Pistols. And their whole thing was that they couldn't play. Mm-hmm. And I just found that as a music fan, that to be the most insulting concept. And I just immediately in my brain equated punk with garbage. So why would I listen to it? And apparently, as I was softening up to heavier music, I had to reassess. And so it was like, you go to Tape Town, did you have a Tape Town growing up in...
No.
What?
No, we did not. Not in Tacoma. Or at least not that I'm aware of.
I was trying to think of what was in the Tacoma Mall. But anyway, we had Tape Town and Kmart, and that was in Harbor Electronics. And believe it or not, Harbor Electronics was the cool record store, which was at the mall. Which is the mall that I think that if people have seen that video where Nirvana is doing a video in a Radio Shack, I think that might been the Radio Shack in that mall. But there's two Radio Shacks in Aberdeen. But anyway, you go there, and they had the Iron Maiden, they had all the great posters, no Misfits. Nothing. And so I was like, for a couple months, I'm like, I couldn't, finally, I was lucky enough to be a kid that got to come here to Seattle a lot. So the first time I'm in freshman in high school, and I'm like scouring through the Rocket, which is the local paper, and there was Fallout Records and Skateboards, which was Olive Way, which was my mecca as a child, as a young man. And I walked in there, and like a complete dork, walked in and bought Walk Among Us and a Misfits t-shirt, and I literally said to the guy, if it's good enough for Metallica, it's good enough for me. And it was like, oh god, I can't imagine what that guy... You need a
shirt that says
and that was the coolest. Oh, and I also bought a shirt from the shop, and I literally wore it till it had holes in it. Mm-hmm. I love that shirt so much. That was like my thing. But that, to me, Metallica, that's a whole nother story about. I could do a whole nother show on Metallica, and I won't bore you with that. But putting on Walk Among Us, like having no frame of reference, other than the fact that they've got
Metallica
skulls.
likes these guys.
Yeah, they got the skulls on the shirts, and of course the album I had, you couldn't get the Green Hell Last Caress. I actually never heard Last Caress. I heard Green Hell because it's on Earth AD, but the other
wait, so Collection 1 or 2.
Yeah, but I didn't hear that one. I didn't get Collection 1 until way later. But I didn't ever get to hear Last Caress until I was in college. Okay. So that was already a kind of thing like, well, I'm not going to be able to get that song. But it didn't really matter because I think it would have actually been a kind of a weird thing because it's almost Last Caress is almost like a doo-wop song,
right?
But
American Nightmare.
Walk Among Us is just such a Last Caress is a doo-wop song. Did I say anyway?
No. But I'm saying American Nightmare is another one where he's like, it totally does Elvis.
Oh gosh,
yeah.
Anyway, we used to have a running bit. But I'll tell that story later with a guy in my high school. But it's like it would like make you break out into a sweat. That record was crazy. It was like Walk Among Us, like feedback. They didn't seem to care that their guitars were screeching, and it was like a buzzsaw, and it was fast, And it was like, I just thought, man, these guys are terrifying in a good way.
Right.
That the fact that they're just like gang vocals, which that stuff had already kind of started to cross-pollinate into heavy metal, the early thrash stuff, but hearing it in its pure form of that kind of, because I never quite figured out what hardcore was in those days, because it was just such a mission. At that time, everything was cross-pollinating, so it was kind of hard to say. Everything was about delineations, but then they'd go, you'd find out, oh, that's mostly people's opinions. It's not really like, it's not like a really good ethnomusicologist kind of assessment of the genre, which is fine, whatever. But yeah, I remember like listening to that and like one kind of remarking about, man, this is really lo-fi. But even though it wasn't heavy metal, like, Motley Crue, Theater of Pain, and Shout at the Devil, it wasn't heavy like that. It was fast. It was furious. It was, the strange thing, even though they were talking about eating brains and guts and being a teenage Martian.
From Mars. Yeah, teenage from Mars.
There was almost like an earnestness to it that was like kind of almost lacking in the bands that I was listening to.
Yeah.
And in the night, the only thing was that they never really cracked that fourth wall, so you could ever get a sense of like, well, is this a joke? Is this a thing? Because it's like you had no easy way to just kind of pick up a magazine and go, oh, this is they're playing into, and mainly I think it's probably because that album specifically was such an encapsulated piece, and at least from the way I look at it, Misfits were never seemed to be a true album band, because they do singles and they re-record their singles, and then they would, so like that was the definitive document. Now if I had jumped in and like maybe heard She, I'd have been, maybe it wouldn't have taken, it might, like I loved it when I heard it, but it wouldn't have necessarily hooked me.
No, the She Cough Cool single EP thing or whatever it was, that to me, if that was the first Misfits thing I ever heard, I never would have got into them.
Right.
Because to me, that is more what Samhain was supposed to be.
Right.
Sort of that dark overtone, very gothic, kind of trancey almost music.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, with the Misfits, with the later recordings and the albums, and they did a couple of EPs and they did a couple of albums, and then they went back and did collections. And a lot of that, and we can talk about it later, but a lot of that had to do with money. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why their songs are so fast, and a reason why it is so raw, it had to do with the fact that they didn't have the money, and they had so much time in a recording studio, and they were going to record everything they possibly could and then get out of there. And so that's why a lot of it has such a frenetic pace. It's kind of like, we're going to rock, and we got another song, and then if we've got enough, we can put out an album. If we don't, it's an EP, whatever. And we'll come back in next year after we tour and do another thing,
That's definitely an aspect of, fast-paced DIY music that seems to be almost gone now. Well, even though the technology is so simple, the immediacy is kind of gone. Because I don't know what interview, maybe it was one of the brothers, had kind of, no, it was Eerie Vaughn, I think, had made a comment in an interview kind of talking about something about how Danzig was notoriously like cheap when it came to wanting to buy studio time. Right. So he would just go and say like, whatever's the cheapest studio, and they would just rush through it and get it and kind of try to mix it later or whatever. But I mean, the truth is that that's part of the charm. I mean,
yes,
that's what when I got over the whole concept of punk being kind of a scam,
mm-hmm.
and I kind of started thinking about it like as a legit musical thing, because I never got into the politics of punk. I never understood that, the ethics of punk, the lifestyle of punk was actually something that was actually separate to the music sometimes, and had like Crass and those mm-hmm. kind of crazy guys where like almost the belief systems are more important than the music, and I never got into that. So when someone says punk, I just think of really fast paced, lo-fi music mm-hmm. that wasn't metal or whatever. But it became like that was that kind of stuff became the benchmark of what I liked with punk. It was like almost like when I finally threw my money together and got Nevermind the Bollocks, which at the time I bought it, God, when did that come out? 77, something like that.
Yeah,
for rough.
It was definitely before.
So I would say I bought it 10 years afterwards, which at the time you could have told me it was 100 years because 10 years felt, right. I was 14. So, it's like, oh my God, this album's 10 years old. These guys are probably dead now.
Well, with the Sex Pistols.
Yeah,
with the Pistols.
Sure. But the Pistols were so disappointing for me at the time. I mean, I love them now, but when Misfits were really, truly the first punk band that I ever listened to. So when you hear that, and then you put on a guy and he's got like a phaser on his guitar, and it's slow, and it's like 130 beats a minute instead of 210, you're like, well, what is this? This is not, even the Ramones were faster than the Pistols. So I could go with I like the Ramones because, the early stuff was probably a little bit more lo-fi, but they were the closest in sound, but they also had that kind of that, for lack of a better term, goth kind of thing, which was a little. It's not goth in any way, shape, or form. It's almost like
not goth how we associate today with
But now, in retrospect, it really kind of did serve the. I always think about like when I meet somebody that said, "Oh, I was a goth in high school," and I'm like, "Oh, wow."
Like, were you a fan of The Cure, or did you listen to some crazy hardcore
Sisters
music?
of Mercy and Christian Death and all that stuff? Yeah. But it's like, I feel like there are many branches on the tree, and really, I guess that's what I was kind of coming back to with the kind of the camp aspects of the Misfits and the reunited Misfits and what Jerry kind of does, where I feel like Danzig was really wanted to adhere to this almost gothic sense of mystery and the horror, because it's like he'd pivot from being like, Return of the Fly with Vincent Price to like invoking like, the Gnostic Gospels and all these like kind of much more of a religious kind of like I don't think the guy ever said like I'm a Satanist or anything like that.
Well, that's a whole nother topic that we can cover, that whether or not Danzig is actually a Satanist. And also,
and it's like that kind
but it's implied clearly.
Yes, and that's a thing where it's like I found well, even the Reunited Misfits weren't operating when I was during this time, but that's one of the things about Danzig that at the time, the 14, 15-year-old version of me really enjoyed the not knowing. It was like a mystery. It was almost like reading about Bigfoot. Is he real? Is he not real? Is he evil? Is he just a guy doing a shtick? Because the people that they would equate him with, a lot of people like, or, when the 80s kind of heavy metal hard rock, when a lot of the kind of ghoulish, macabre imagery, people would immediately go, well, back in the day, we had Alice Cooper. And you'd think, well, I love Alice Cooper now, but when I would, at that age, at like 13 or 14, I would remember Alice Cooper as being the guy that was on The Muppet Show. And it was corny. He was like, he would have horns, and I mean, he's a great songwriter. I'm not knocking
like Ozzy too.
Yeah, Ozzy had become a joke by the time I was a
Bark
kid.
at the Moon was silly.
Yeah, he was doing The Ultimate Sin, which we used to colloquially call the ultimate wimp. It was like I was not an Ozzy solo guy. It took me years to appreciate that early sound.
No, I was more of a Sabbath too.
Yeah, and I was like, I got into Sabbath a little bit later, but again, that was like, oh wow, that is so, that is right there. That's by that time I was ready for it, and it was like, and I think that's what Danzig as a character appealed to me, that kind of darkness. Not that I was like, oh, I really want to get into Satan or anything, but it was like just the unknowing of it. And again, we were talking about this before we started recording about, at least what I was consuming is like a lot of horror novels. I was getting into Stephen King. I was Clive Barker and comic books, and he was a comic book nerd, and so we knew that he wasn't doing that Verotic stuff yet.
No, that was late in the 90s.
But we knew that was kind of like, it's like, okay, that's the toolbox that he's learning. And I found the Misfits were always kind of like a dead concern. So, I'd consume all that, Earth AD and all the and Legacy of Brutality, and I also never had I didn't have records as a kid, so basically everything was a cassette. Those cheap, and since Glenn's probably a cheap guy, because I think the Walk Among Us reissue I think came out on Ruby Records, which I don't think is something. Technically, I think the cassette that I bought must have been an unauthorized bootleg. That they must have, because I think the album cover was purple, and I think it's supposed to have been green, or vice versa.
There's multiple. So yes, the cover, and this is again another sort of subtopic of music in general, but the colors of the Walk Among Us record are based on releases and record companies. So there's multiple colors of the vinyl. So the vinyl sleeve, there's multiple covers. There's like green and purple and blue. And then the cassettes, I'm sure, I never got the cassettes. I came to the Misfits in the era of CDs, so I was going back filling my catalog at that point with CDs, but I do have some of the records. But yeah, so as they put them out, they came out with different colors. And I don't know if, again, bands and the different pressings and the different colors of vinyl and whatnot, like, I don't know who started all that nonsense, but Glenn really, he embraced the hell out of that.
Like, just multiple editions.
Like, multiple pressings, multiple editions. And part of it, again, goes back to what we were talking about, the DIY-ness of punk rock in the 70s and 80s. When back in the day when you would order the records from Glenn himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, so you would see these things, write to the Fiend Club, right?
Okay.
And you would write, and Glenn would hand letter the envelopes and send you the shirts or the pictures, and you could get stuff from him, basically. Yeah. And the deal was they would go and they would press, 100 copies of whatever EP, Cough Cool or whatever on a 45, and then it would be one thickness of vinyl because they got a deal, or it would be another thickness the next time because they went through a different company. It would be a different color. And then when this stuff started to become kind of culty and collectible-y, especially with the exposure from Metallica and other larger bands who cited the Misfits and Danzig as an influence, people started going back on, hey, like a lot of us did, right? I should probably check this out and kind of figure this out, since it's such a strong influence on these other bands that I like. All that stuff started to become incredibly collectible. And then right around the same time, he was putting out records, everybody gets the black, vinyl, but we made 100 white vinyls and we made 50 red vinyls. And then we have a super cool swirled purple and whatever. He started to embrace that and kind of he did the whole Star Wars thing. Collect them all. You got to have them all, So that came later.
Record scum stuff. I kind of hate that stuff, but I understand that it has a value. But
some of it, and it's, and this is again we could do a whole nother show, but just on the topic of collecting. There's a reason why some things are valuable, and it's because of scarcity. And there's a reason why certain things are different because of regional releases, like, a book, for example. Well, there's a first edition United States publishing, but there's also a first edition European publishing. And if you're a collector, you want those things, and there's differences in format. Well, Glenn's stuff, when he was, young and putting out the Misfit stuff, I got $50, I can make 100 records at this one company. Then they go play a bunch of shows, and they do another pressing. But they go with somebody else because they're getting a better deal. So all those little differences and nuanced things, the different labels, the different thicknesses, all that stuff is a byproduct of necessity.
Right.
It's not a evil corporate record companies scam to try and get your dollars, which it all is now. It's like Pearl Jam's going to put out a new album and it's going to be on 15 different colors of vinyls, and you're going to get, and you can buy it this way and that way, and it's like that's now. But back then it was like I can only get 50 EPs printed because this is all the money I have. And so then now of course we go back and we look and we're like, oh my god, I've got to have them all or whatever. And then there's so many bootleg pressings of live shows. I have a stack of of Misfits vinyl that's live shows from all over the country that people had recorded. I mean, and qualities are all over the place, but that kind of went kind of down that rabbit hole, trying to find stuff, shows, and all that. But to go back, if you'll indulge me for a moment, to our first exposure to all of this, I was very similar to you in a way, but I heard the Garage Days, Metallica's Garage Days revisited or revisited.
Yeah.
And saw the name Danzig as the guy who wrote those songs, right? And so then I kind of went into, that was right around the time when the Danzig band was, I think they were on 2 Lucifuge by that time, right around that time, 89.
89. Yeah, that's when that came out.
And so I went through Danzig and then back into the Misfits, just simply because it didn't say Misfits on the Garage Days EP. So I was like, okay, Danzig, that Danzig, that's the guy, okay. And then sort of came to that. But the interesting thing is, looking back on it now, Misfits and Danzig have been sort of in my periphery growing up a lot more than I really ever understood until going back and being, oh yeah, that. For example, when I was in junior high, I was very much into skateboarding, and I got Thrasher magazine.
Oh yeah.
There was a cover of Thrasher magazine that was the Initium Samhain album cover, and they had a whole interview in there with Glenn Danzig about his Japanimation collection of toys and comics, and the fact that he was a big skateboard guy. Turns out he probably wasn't really that big of a skateboard guy, but he did a deal with Zorlak Skateboards to put out Misfits and Samhain skateboards.
Yeah, that's the same company that
did the Metallica stuff, right? Because so you're starting to get that, and so that band cross-pollination thing, and so he was in there talking about ostensibly, because Thrasher was a lifestyle magazine for skaters, right? It talked about not only pro skaters and events and products and things like that, but it also talked about bands. And there was a lot of coverage of various, SoCal, thrash punk stuff, and and there was a lot of talk about Black Flag and those types
Septic
of bands.
Death.
Yeah, MOD and SOD and all that stuff. Yeah, and so that I remember reading that article and thinking, oh, this guy's interesting, but again, being a preteen and an early teenager, and having parents who were, very conservative and very controlling over, what money was spent and what you listened to and things like that. Like, I never really got to put my toes in that, right? And never really listened to any of the music, but I kind of knew that. And then I also remember, and I don't know where this was, but it was at a record store of some kind around the same era, and I saw the Bullet single.
Okay.
With the Kennedy's exploding head, right? Yeah. But I remember that being, like you had talked about again, the music. I remember that being an extremely striking image.
Yeah.
Right? And it very provocative and very, very much not involved in sort of the mainstream of music. Like, yeah, we're going to say, things, we're going to sing about girls, and we're going to sing about drugs, but it's all going to be very, hairspray and lipstick, and it's going to be kind of cute and neat, and it'll be packaged so we can do it on MTV. And these guys are like, yeah, we're going to put Kennedy on the cover of this thing, and we're going to sing about his wife sucking dick, and we're going to have this exploding head thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, wow. That's, and you're not that far on, really, when you think about it. I mean, that's 20 years after the fact. It's still very much part of the cultural zeitgeist, is the whole Kennedy assassination.
Yeah,
where were you the day he was killed?
It's a touchstone where it's like,
yeah.
That was a thing that we obviously didn't experience, but yeah, it loomed large in this thing of like, kind of like, I don't know, maybe the things that you don't make fun of or something, or like, this is the darkest day. It's that kind of idea where you're like, well, these, in some ways, again, it is almost humorous, because I don't feel like that I don't know what their intent were, because every interview I've ever heard with him, he's very hostile to anything that might constitute, quote unquote, I don't know, square, culture for squares or whatever, But yeah, I remember hearing that. I didn't hear that song until actually a bit later again, because I was like shocked.
Yeah,
kind of like, wow, that's one. You could hear the lyrics, which had been an issue with some of that earlier, the hardcore stuff and Demonomania. It's like I don't even know what he's saying in that except for Demonomania.
My father was a wolf.
Oh, okay.
That's all he says.
So you've got better hearing than I've got.
Well, no, but again, it's also a lot of things. You listen to it over. I mean, I became very much obsessed with the Misfits and listening to their music like a lot. And it's one of those weird things where you listen to a song for years, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Is that? Well, did he really just? What is that? Like that's the word? Like you thought it was something else for a while, and you hear the thing. Yeah,
I'm terrible at that. And like most of my song lyrics are misunderstood.
Well, and it's true. And so I mean, like Demonomania, that was one of those things where you were just like blah, 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 for a while, and then you start to decipher it a little bit, and you're like, okay, your father was a wolf. All right, your mother was a whore. Okay. But that's another great thing about the Misfits is that there's like 3 lyrics per song. You just say them over and over again really fast and loud. And then you hope, your audience gets it. Like We Are 138. That's all he says throughout the entire song.
What does that mean anyway?
There's a lot of speculation about it.
I was always scared that I was gonna because punk rock and they've always had. I was always gonna find out like 138 meant some kind of secret like white nationalist thing or something, and I was always like, I don't know if I want to know. But it's like then again, it's like.
It's tied to a couple of, or it's been tied to a couple of different things, and of course, Glenn and his "don't want to talk about it" kind of attitude is like he doesn't care because it's Misfits, but apparently it's been tied to some Japanese horror comic anime thing that he was into, a robot thing, and it's also there's the THX. But that's 1138,
right.
But there's sort of that, and there's a bunch of different. I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's not like
it's supposed to be mysterious, and
of course,
it's
like a lot of the things he does.
It still kind of is, and right. I guess you can say, well, 30 years down, you're still confusing your listener. Then I guess that's a good thing.
Well, into an interesting point about Danzig and how he initially he comes off with this fuck all attitude about everything and how he just hates everybody and he's all very and like whatever and Goombay, but. One of the things that he did say in an interview he did with Rolling Stone a couple of years ago was, and maybe this is a lot of retconning now that he's an old man and he's got his money, but he said, I always wanted to make music that lasted, right? And I suppose every artist, right? Like I'm a graphic visual artist, right? Mm-hmm. The conceit there is you're creating something that's supposed to outlive you, right?
Right.
And whether or not anyone actually recognizes it or appreciates it is a whole other question. But the idea of anything, writing a book or, painting a painting or writing a song or whatever, is that eventually you're going to die, but that's still there. And so his whole thing was, I just want to make stuff that we're talking about 30, 40 years later. Now, we are, but is it because it's really good or is it because we just don't understand what 138 means? Right? And that's the question, right?
And I think that's kind of like, you were saying something earlier before we started recording about how you've been kind of reassessing art and things that you enjoyed younger and finding it kind of bereft of a lot of the things that you thought were there, or it doesn't hold, it doesn't stand up the test of time.
Well, and part of it is like you were talking about earlier, the first time you listened to the Misfits, and I had a very, very similar experience because as a young boy, junior high age, dealing with all the awkwardness of, liking girls and playing D&D and being made fun of and beat up in the schoolyard, like being a skateboarder and being interested in music, the Misfits to me was extremely inspirational, especially like early on in high school when I really, really discovered like punk rock in junior high was kind of this thing, but the Misfits were super inspirational because it was, like you say, it was DIY and it was amazing. And learning to play the guitar and doing those things, like you felt a connection to the music because one, it was very powerful and very emotionally evocative when you listen to it. I mean, like you say, the speed, and like you say, you get the cold sweats listening to it because you're connecting with it. Right?
Yeah.
It's scaring you in a good way. It's opening up the world to you. It's the same. and I hate to admit this, but I felt the same way the first time I ever heard Metallica. At that point, I had been, a deep consumer of pop music, and one of my earliest concerts was Depeche Mode and stuff like that. And I was listening to a lot of Duran Duran, and there was that whole, dying end of the new wave era in the mid '80s, and to hear the first kind of intro to Metallica's "Injustice for All," that high pitched, whiny, chord, and they're coming in on it, and then it just goes into that rapid rat-tat-tat drum thing. It's almost like the first time you had sex. You're like, this changes everything, right?
Yeah, it's so
it changes everything.
So it's such a sonically, that music, at least for, I guess it's like that whole thing. You kind of had to have been there, because I don't know what a 15-year-old would do with Danzig 1 or Injustice for All, because I remember when did Danzig 1 must have came out in 87?
It was 87, 80... Yeah, I want to say 87 because 2 was 89.
The reason I kind of want to know the actual date is because I got it for Christmas.
Nice.
And that was my parents...
Nothing says Christmas like a little satanic rock.
Well, my parents,
I know,
God bless my parents. They were so... they indulged their goofy son and didn't... with very... very few... I guess it was 88. So that sounds about right. Because I think I got it the Christmas of 88. But before that, because I was a long term... I'm such a goof. Because instead of going out and going to dances and having, actual interactions... on Saturday nights, I would stay home and watch Headbangers Ball. I could have gone out and hung out with those people, and eventually I did. But for when I was thinking, there was no other place I wanted to be at midnight than MTV, and I would get that little taste of, because like most of the time those bands were terrible, because they'd throw the bands I liked, the energy, the aesthetic of a guy that's like, I just grow my hair out, I wear jeans, a black t-shirt, I don't put on lipstick, that kind of stuff that I really enjoyed, kind of just aggressive, no trappings. It wasn't about trying to get a girl or whatever, or a car. Even though I like that stuff. It's not like I grew up and but my first concert was Whitesnake and Motley Crue, but that was the sunset on that kind of stuff, because by the time I was out of my freshman year, I was like, that stuff sucks. Because, that's being that age, at least at that time. I'm sure it's even crazier now that we're constantly going through identities or whatever. But when you watch Headbangers Ball, Def Jam America, which was Rick Rubin's label, they did that ad. They did very smart marketed ads with just like that opening... twist of Cain, the harmonic, that note, and then it would just be like this, the skull, the Michael Golden.
Yes, Michael Golden skull, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Which we have to cover. And you're just like, what? I know this is the Misfits guy, but what the hell is going on here?
Right.
Because this isn't fast, but it's
heavy.
It's scary.
Yeah. And
it's like, is Rick Rubin releasing an album by an avowed devil man, like a Satanist? Is this record gonna, because at the time it's in the mishmash morass of your brain, it's I'd gone through a period of being kind of in touch with my Catholicism, and then eventually kind of going ugh. But at the same token, it's all the trappings of that.
Yes.
It's candles, it's crosses, it's
quoting the Bible on your album cover about
dead.
Satan.
It's your eternal torment.
Yeah.
Now, okay, maybe I wasn't but it still was in the. It's not like all of a sudden one day I woke up and go, I don't believe in any of that.
Right.
It's Tuesday. It's no, it was all rattling around in there, but it was so provocative. It was so this, Metallica, I got the sweats, and I thought the devil was going to jump out of my headphones and get me then. Well, he didn't, because it's just music, and I'm starting to learn that, like, maybe you could turn into the skid. You
turn into the skid.
Well,
nice.
You don't
control the crash, right?
And I mean, the truth is that I was quote unquote, I was a good boy, and I always was. And even when I was into this stuff, it was never killing cats out by the creek. So these overtures are very, very minor. It wasn't like, well, I listen to Danzig now. I'm going to go to class and plot the death of all my classmates. It wasn't like that. It was just like that kind of your zeitgeist of being kind of, the Cold War was winding down. We weren't thinking about the world, and mainly because it was like the 6 o'clock news. That was your window of the world, half an hour a day. Then like 23 and a half hours a day, you never even thought about what was going outside of your house. So these kind of weird existential concerns would be like, wow. And also the economic aspect where I'd be like, I'm going to ask for this for Christmas. And it's like, is mom and dad, when are they eventually going to put their foot down and say, like, we're not going to buy this weird shit for you? But they always did. Right. And they were always good about it. And they were always, I had one conversation with my dad once, and we both ended up laughing about it. It was like the thing about something about Dungeons and Dragons or something, like, I don't want you getting involved with devil worship or something. Like, Dad, if you met the dorks I play this stuff with,
they'd be too scared to meet the devil.
They'd be too, right? Yeah, this is not, that kind of thing. So they were very good and indulgent, getting South of Heaven for Christmas or Danzig. But when that record, I was like, and that's the thing, it's like, I held on to that this Danzig record was coming out and these riff. And so when it finally came out, it was it's like, I liked it so much better than the Misfits, it wasn't even funny. Not that I like all of a sudden go, oh, that's garbage now. I still listen to the Misfits, but I felt like, oh, this is like what happens when somebody has a band and it's like, it's cool, but then like the next band they have, it's like, oh, that's when they really figure out what they should be doing. And that record was so like, such an onslaught of like creepiness and minor, stuff in the bluesy, and I'd been, listening to some Led Zeppelin, so I kind of, the dings on it were like the idea, like, well, he's kind of singing a song that the Led Zeppelin stole from a blues guy, and he's not crediting it, that kind of stuff. But generally, it was like, what is he talking about? It's like mother is he killing his mother in this song?
That was in the Misfits.
Yeah,
mother, can I go out and kill tonight?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This obsession with his mother, and that was so thing. We loved that record. And it's funny you bring that up because there was a guy, one of my friends in high school, that was kind of like, he was the guy, it was very hard to like, when I was into something, it wasn't, I would say like 90% of the time, I found these bands on my own. I never had any musical peers at that point. It wasn't like somebody would say, hey, you got to check this out. I was the one that would go up to Seattle and I'd buy all the magazines and I'd read them and then I'd buy the tapes and I'd bring them back and I'd go, you got to hear this. And very rarely did it stick. I was the kid that was into Faith No More 2 years before everyone else. It was my claim to fame, which I don't think it means anything now.
No, but I don't think it does.
It's like completely, like, I don't think people understand that. But Danzig was that thing, and I would get my friend into it, and we'd listen to it and thing, and then like his mom would go, God, why do you listen to that crap? That guy's just got mommy issues. I'm like, what? He's just like, mother. It's like, it's every song about his mother, and we're just like, hey, what are you talking about? It's pretty dark. He's like talking about the Bible and like evil and stuff. Shut up.
It's funny when you actually have to defend the evilness of Danzig against somebody. That's humorous.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, like my experience growing up was you're always constantly having to eschew the darkness associated with that stuff. Because I remember, my parents were like, we don't like you listening to that Metallica stuff, they're the devil. And I'm like, come on, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's not even, it's not even.
I to this day remember, I used to love, remember that show? It was like a Cosby Show spin-off, A Different World. It was like Lisa Bonet, and they all went on, it was like a Hillman College. Anyway, there was some sitcom I used to like, and I really liked that show. And one of the actresses, like, was doing an interview, and she just offhandedly said something about, I think they were talking about, because rap had just kind of started getting big. And this may be around I don't remember. there had been some controversy about a rap lyric or something. It might have been Two Live Crew.
No,
And she was like, well, I wish they'd stop harassing these rap groups and go after those devil-worshipping bands like Metallica. And I was just like, oh, they don't worship the devil. And I was like, I remember being so
I'm not watching your show anymore.
I did. I stopped watching it because
Nice.
it was like, all right, different world. You're out of my rotation. These people are like actively. And I mean, and it's funny to think about that. But again, in the zeitgeist, our cross to bear, so to speak, in the 80s was the PMRC.
Right.
And it's like, at the time, I didn't, as a young person, I didn't really understand what their point was. And that, just to me, it looked like they were literally going to ban something. It's like something that I'm enjoying. I was, I was in Scouts, and we definitely listened to our share of Two Live Crew. Mm-hmm. So it was like, I was listening to all this transgressive stuff, and I was enjoying it. And it felt like almost kind of like, oh, this is what being an adult means, is that you can listen to wherever the hell you want, and it's going to be difficult, and you're going to have to think about it, and you might laugh at a dirty joke. Yeah. So it felt very enticing. But then at the same token, Tipper Gore, or as she was colloquially known, Tipper Whore, as we all used to call her in Al Gore's ex-wife now. She held these...
She didn't release the chakra?
Yeah.
That's all in the story.
Okay.
Anyway.
No, but, it's like that idea where you honestly, for the lack of a better term, for the conversation, I'll say you felt persecuted.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And we've definitely...
As much as a white kid in the suburbs in the 80s could feel persecuted. Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, and then, of course, that was another thing. Around that time, there was the Satanic Panic, which I'm no expert on, but except the fact that, I lived through that era of Geraldo's interviews with, like, real Satanists, which usually is...
Was it Anton LaVey and, two other people?
Or be some guy with a bunch of hairspray and black lipstick on there going, like, I worship Satan, and you're like... And then they'd have Ozzy Osbourne on, and this is, like, his, midway through his third rehab trip, and he'd just have, like, what is it, the Diary of the Mad Housewife hair? And
yes.
I'm a Christian. I don't understand about all this talk about Satan. I don't have cornflakes with Satan in the morning. And you're just like... And so these guys, not only... these are guys obviously looking at their next 20 years of wealth, all of a sudden confronted with, Geraldo is doing stories saying that, like, oh, these corporate musicians are trying to insert Satanism into... And then, of course, the Judas Priest case where the guy killed him... he tried to kill himself. And he mutilated his face, and then he claimed that Judas Priest put messages. And I can't remember when. Oops, sorry. When things were getting kind of heated for music, where you thought, well, are they going to start suing people for these songs? And we usually know when you hit somebody in the pocketbook, these things go away.
Right.
It's just all of a sudden, it's like you liked something on Tuesday, and it's going to cost too much money to make it, and then it'll just be. It'll go from being a thing where you're thinking, like, everybody's going to be into heavy metal now, and then it's just gone. And I think, that, and a lot of that, especially that first Danzig record, and it's like, the Slayer South of Heaven, and that kind of, because that stuff was kind of on the, like, metal was on the rise. People were paying attention to Metallica, Megadeth, because apparently doing a cover of Anarchy in the UK meant that you were political, or Peace Sells. I mean,
who's buying? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, they were starting to look to these people as being, for better or worse. I don't think Danzig was ever somebody that, like, they would have rock the vote, with Danzig, but...
Which is, and it's interesting because even though his music, is in a way deeply political, it was not. Like Metallica and Megadeth Megadeth was named after a term used to calculate casualties in nuclear war.
Yeah, it wasn't like Orrin Hatch or something. Said something like that.
And these guys there was a lot of, like the song Blackened by Metallica was about nuclear war. And it's like like you say, I could see those bands becoming way more political and being involved in something like that. But Danzig is funny. He just like he didn't care about it, or he didn't get. I mean,
he'd just be like, "What do you think about what's going on? Think everybody Washington's a bunch of clowns."
And that's exactly what he would say.
Exactly, that's about as much as you get out of him.
But again, he has this sort of crazy like a fox thing going on, because he, if you watch the interminably terrible home videos that came out. So the Danzig Danzig the home video, or whatever it was called.
Okay.
Right? The very first interview they do with him after there's a couple of music videos, he's sitting there on a statue, and they've got some I don't know if it's a voiceover, but it's some creepy low voice asking questions like, "Do you believe in the devil?" Right? And he's like, "Do I believe in the devil?" Yeah, and then he's like, "Well, I don't know, man." Like, and he kind of gives you but he's smart in his response.
Yeah.
He says, they ask him, "Do you believe in God?" And he's like, "Do I believe in God as like an old white dude in a beard somewhere? No. Do I believe in God as a power? Yes. Okay, great. So then conversely, do you believe in Satan?" And he's like, "Well, look, man, if you believe in God, you have to believe in Satan, because it's all part of the same belief system, right?"
Yeah.
And so then you can't. He basically took the pointy stick away from all the religious freaks, right? Because they're all after these guys going, "Oh, you worship the devil," and it's like, well, your entire belief structure is what created this thing called the devil, right?
Right.
And now you're telling me I can't believe in it as at least an entity, right? And so he has this again, the total Glenn snark. He gives you the crossways look across his surgically reconstructed nose, and he's like, "I know more about organized religion than most organized religions know about it." So
I've seen that video.
Yeah, and he's doing that whole thing where he's like, "Yeah, bring it on."
He's probably not wearing a shirt when he's saying.
No, he's wearing a jean jacket.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're outdoors.
Okay. Because half those interviews, he's not wearing a shirt.
That's true,
it's
too.
Just like he's careening around. He's around at that house.
That's when he's in the house.
The Los Feliz house, which I just watched a clip of that before we started recording. It looked like a shithole back when he was living in it.
Yeah.
He's obviously never had someone come in and like clean up.
Mother.
Yeah, his mom.
Come clean my house.
His mom would come and clean.
Come clean it.
But yeah, it's like, and that's the thing where it's in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't realize this at the time, because I kind of would have missed that. It's such a pretentious word, but it's the one that comes on. The frisson, as they call it, like in horror. That kind of like the uncomfortableness of the not knowing. But really, if you sit there and you like, as an adult, you go, well, this is him doing a Vincent Price, but in the 80s when things had, where, things had to be real, as I was going to say. But I mean, people were much more, if there was any hint of camp, it would immediately have kind of fallen
away.
Yeah, and the idea where he didn't want to explicitly say one way or the other about anything, it just did. I mean, for a short period of time, it's not like the irony is that he never really had mainstream success until 94 with the Mother
re-release. Yeah, and it was on the Thrall Demon Sweat when he put out the Thrall Demon Sweat EP. That had an Elvis cover, ironically called "I'm Evil," and then it had the live version of Mother, which actually is his only top 10 single or whatever.
And I really don't like that version. I never did.
I don't actually, and it's kind of funny. Mother, it's like one of those things. And I hate to fall into the trope of the music guy who's like, yeah, you want to do because it's popular is the only reason why you like it.
Worst Danzig single ever.
Well, it's not my most favorite Danzig song, but I think because there is, and this is going to sound entirely pretentious, and I don't want it to, but there's this uneducated sort of number of people out there whose only interaction with Danzig was. They were watching MTV at the time that song was popular. And so whenever somebody sees you wearing a Danzig t-shirt or they see the Danzig sticker on your car or whatever, they all go, "Mother!" Yeah. And you're like, yeah, and? Yeah. And there was, 9 other albums that have come out. Hello. I kind of get... It makes me frustrated as a fan.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, as much as I told you this whole thing about how it kind of, there was that kind of anxiety about is this evil, is this fun, there was as time went on, it became less and less of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And like I would think about the time that Lucifuge came out. We used to call it Lucy Fudge and stuff like that. But we still loved it. But
that
we
was a
didn't.
fantastic album.
It didn't feel like maybe that. Yeah, that's a fantastic record.
Long Way Back from Hell.
He gave up. He gave up a little bit of that kind of eerie goth thing for kind of a more rounded over, more interesting sound. He has like acoustic stuff on that. It has a really, Her Black Wings was I think was the first. I think I remember I bought
Her Black Wings. Yeah.
Oh boy, this is good. The single.
Singles, yeah, baby.
Of Her Black Wings, which I think had a B-side of like that radio edit or something.
Right.
I don't know, but that was a important record. But that also had that was also the one that came with a little card inside that you could order your Danzig merchandise.
Right.
You could get your is there a name for his upside down cross with the horns on it? Does he have is there a proper name for that?
No, I don't know if he has a name for it, but that became even beyond the skull. It became the de facto symbol,
right? Because
one of the interesting things, and if you want, we can transition into the golden conversation.
Yeah, let's do that.
But the Danzig skull, as it's colloquially known now, was actually part of the Sandman logo.
Right.
And so he started using that way before. So if you look at what is it, November Coming Fire, I think it is.
Right.
Which has the weird skeletons.
Is it? Yeah. Is it the Final Descent has that?
Maybe it's Final Descent. But it's the one that has the flames on the cover and has the three skeleton-y bodies, and the one in the middle has the skull, and then it's on the back of a bunch of the stuff, and then he transitioned it to just the skull for the cover of Danzig 1. But then, starting with Danzig 2, he's had the crucifix thing, the upside-down crucifix with it, and that became a logo for a while for the band. Like, it was on all their tour shirts and all that stuff, stickers and whatever.
I'm kind of lucky the upside-down cross wasn't part of the shirt at first, because it was bad enough to go in with the horns and the because I think I had that Danzig shirt, and it just has the golden skull, as we'll say, on the front, and it says Danzig on the back. Right. So it doesn't even say the name. So if you're walking up to somebody, they're just like, this dude's got a freaking skull on his shirt.
He's got a beast.
And if it's bad enough that I had an upside down cross in my little conservative Washington town, I probably would have lost my paper route or whatever.
Yeah, I think that it's a similar thing. I had gone to a Catholic high school, and when Lucifuge came out, I think it was a freshman. It was between freshman and sophomore year, and you're going through confirmation and all those wonderful Catholic things as a teenager, and I'm rolling around with the skull shirt on too, and it was I guess my attempt at deep irony, I'm going to a Catholic school and I'm going through confirmation, but I got Satan on my t-shirt.
Exactly.
Check me out. I'm bucking the system,
Exactly.
Even though I have perfect attendance in school and I'm getting good grades.
I'm right there with you.
So so the Danzig skull, right? This great iconic thing, and it's actually every single piece of Danzig and Misfits related iconography is stolen from somewhere.
Right.
Excuse me. So the Misfits logo is a highly stylized version of a photograph of a 1940s serial character called the Crimson Ghost. And he was a sort of a poor man's Batman. He was a detective who wore this robe, and he had this skull mask, and I don't know, I've never seen any of the serials, but I don't know if the guy was actually an undead PI or if that was just his costume. But it was one of those things where you would go to a movie on Saturdays, and they would have a double feature, and in between they'd have like Buck Rogers and the Saucer Men from Mars, and Batman or the Crimson Ghost, or like all these other little short serials in between. So it comes from that, and of course it plays into the whole camp thing we're talking about, and about his focus on that sort of 50s, 60s kind of horror genre. So he takes that skull, and then he takes the typeface from Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, and he comes up with the Misfits logo. Now, again, in the DIY era of punk, we look at all of these great, punk albums and punk posters, and it's usually somebody photocopying a picture of something or taking an image that we're very familiar with and reworking it in such a way and, making it their own. And you might be able to get away with that if you're, playing, the American Legion Hall in your town and you're selling cassettes out of the back of your mom's station wagon. And he can get away with that as the Misfits because commercially the Misfits were not a going concern until the 90s. Or maybe even in the late 80s as the Danzig band proper became more popular, that people like us started to go back and consume more of the Misfits product, and so there's more demand for posters and shirts and whatnot. But then he went into Samhain, and the golden skull was appropriated, and he also used the typeface from a movie. It's called like the Giant
Gila Monster?
Yeah, Giant Gila Monsters, yeah. And so he took that typeface and did Samhain, and then ultimately rearranged that typeface for the Danzig. And those things, again, taken, not credited. The skull itself, the ubiquitous double-horned skull, is from the cover of Crystar, the Crystal Warrior, issue number 8 by Marvel Comics. And the cover is drawn by Michael Golden, who is a pretty famous, pretty well-known comic book artist, did a lot of work on many great titles, including Star Wars and G.I. Joe, the Nom, stuff like that. Anyway, he, as part of the larger cover art, did at the bottom of that issue, there is the skull with the curled horns and all that stuff. And there's one of the characters, I don't know if it's Crystar himself, but there's a big warrior guy on the cover, and there's some girl, and kind of the coloration of the cover, the skull doesn't stand out. It's like green and purple, and the background's green and purple, and so it's one of those things that, one, Crystar was a comic that nobody read, so nobody saw it to begin with.
Right.
And two, even though it was on the cover, it did not stand out in the very graphic way that Danzig represented it later in the stark black and white. And so for years, nobody really said anything about it, or nobody even really realized where it came from. And it wasn't until much later on, I think probably around the time after Lucifuge came out, Danzig 2, that the comic book community started to kind of get like, hey man, that's from this thing. Have you paid royalties on it? Or have you given credit to Michael Golden for creating it? But again, this is an era where there's no internet, right?
Right.
There's no, blogs or Twitter or any of that stuff where you can hop on a dude for stealing something like right away and shame the hell out of him and get him to write a check. So eventually some people who wrote about comic books or were in the comic community, like the whole New York, Marvel, DC kind of that enclave, they confronted him about it. And they said, look, you took this thing off of the cover of Crystar, are you going to give Golden credit for creating this thing, right? And he said, well, no, I had to finish it. I had to take the lady off of it, and I had to finish the head and do the stuff. And so he basically said, look, because I took 98% of your art and I put my 2% on it, it's now mine. And that's very much part of that I guess that attitude of the DIY punk. Like, yeah, I took the picture of the burning, monk in Vietnam, but then I changed some stuff around and I put like a McDonald's logo on it, and it's a Dead Kennedys album cover, right?
Right.
Okay. Yes and no. I get that, but he would not acknowledge it, and then it became one of the I don't want to talk about it things.
Right.
Every time it comes up. So the punchline to all of this is that there is a local artist in Seattle. His name is Blackie Shepherd, and he's done interior art on the Voltron comics, and he's actually upcoming. He has a Pumpkinhead comic coming out, which is actually going to be really cool.
Okay.
But he did a T-shirt because he also is a big Danzig fan, but he's also a comic book artist, and he understood the whole Crystar ripoff thing. So he did a T-shirt that has the skull, and in the typeface, the Danzig typeface, instead of it saying Danzig above the skull like all the other shirts, it says Golden. Okay, and he wears it to comic shows. Every time he does a comic show or, you know, any kind of thing where he's selling his art or whatever, or anytime he goes to, like, you know, some of the larger shows where he's not an exhibitor, he always wears this shirt. And so a few years ago, he was at San Diego Comic-Con, and Michael Golden saw him wearing it and was like, dude, I want to talk to you. And called him over, and they did a thing, and he's like, I just made this one shirt. I just wear it. It's like my own thing. It's just sort of my homage to you and to the fact that you never got recognized for the stuff. And so Michael Golden asked Black, he's like, dude, can I make some of those? Like, can I, you know, and he's like,
that's my image. No,
I know. Well, and it's funny because, I mean, think about that for a second. Like, this is a whole statement about how somebody stole your artwork and is using it and profiting off it in such a way, and you've never been reimbursed for it. And you're asking me if you can borrow your art back as a statement, you know? And he was like, of course. He goes, do it. So now Michael Golden, when he's tabling at big shows, is selling, and he's offered them through his website, these shirts.
Nice.
And the thing I think that he's doing is because Glenn, as we've, you know, seen, or, you know, in times past, has become very litigious about, well, I'm the Misfits. I wrote the songs and I did all the stuff, and he sues the hell out of all the former band members and says, you can't play my music and you can't do this, and he's suing former Danzig guys and like all stuff. I think Michael Golden really wants Danzig to sue him over this, so then they can get in the courtroom, and then Michael Golden can explain to a copyright lawyer exactly what happened with the skull.
Oh man, yeah.
And now you've got 30 years of royalties from the Danzig band.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. But it's also very interesting though, because when people started to confront Glenn about the skull, you started to see a change in the logo. So Danzig 3, How the Gods Kill, had a Giger skull.
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
A Giger version, right?
Right.
And Thrall Demon Sweat was the different take, but it was a Simon Bisley painting. And then when Danzig 4 came out, he had gone to a completely new design, and it's actually a stylized version of him almost doing... it's a cartoony version of himself,
right,
with his arms out almost in like a crucifixion pose. But if you kind of lean back and look, his belt is like the teeth, right? And his pecs are kind of like the eyes, and the arms are like the horns. And so he started to change the logo and move away from that, because I think he was worried potentially that, you know, something would come back, but nothing ever came of it. But so Glenn, and the most impactful and iconography of his various bands has just been stuff that he's ripped off from other people and thrown together in his own way and made a shit ton of money off it. So,
you know, again, it's like, I obviously don't know the guy, and I don't know anybody really personally that's interacted with him, but it's the only thing I would say in his defense, and maybe because I just don't want to, if he stumbles across this, I don't want to get sued. But you know, it makes you wonder if, like, sometimes these issues come up, because, you know, there was something very recent that the Kardashian, or Jenners, the youngest of that whatever that thing is, they got
the machine.
Yeah, the machine that's ruining the world. But they got dinged pretty hard for taking like Metallica shirts and just like throwing Metallica logos on shirts with their faces on it. And it's just be like, oh, we're selling this Metallica shirt, and it's not a Metallica shirt; it's a Jenner or Kylie or whatever they're called. And it's like, that's a clear cut violation of logo with somebody who's obviously incredibly wealthy, and they're doing it for money, and they know that a brand that they're associated with has a certain cachet. Now, the only thing that I would ever say in their defense is, like, you know, in 1977 of him stealing Republic cereal Crimson Ghost, it's almost like, my point is that it's like you get so far into something when you realize that you made a decision in 10 minutes that is something you've now with you for 30 years. But not that he shouldn't give this Michael Golden credit. And I'm not saying, but it's like, I almost feel like it's a thing where it's like, yeah, maybe he's not the artist he thinks he is. He's a much better interpreter or something like that. And he just doesn't. He's been coming up with excuses to kind of mollify that. But really, yeah, I'm not defending it. It's just that thing where it's like one of the things where it's not malicious, but he's so far into it, and it's like, oh crap! And nobody's making money in the music biz anymore. Well, that's true. So it's almost like, oh, if I have to give this guy money, it's gonna suck. You want to beat up house in Los Feliz or something? not to say that it's all right, but I did an album cover for a band one time, and really, the truth is I took an image and I manipulated it.
Right.
And if you look at the thing that I manipulated, it's probably 30% different. Mm-hmm. And it's that thing where it's like, I did it. I know I was never financially compensated for it. So at the time I thought, whatever. Right. I bought a book in a thrift store and then I copied the cover and the band. And it's like, to be honest, it's like, if there's going to be a lawsuit,
we go to the band.
Go to the band.
Right.
And they can just reissue it differently. But at the same token, I thought to myself, well, my claim to fame is really I changed a photo 30%, and it's right. Like, so I do understand that it's like, it is a shame that he, the things, his iconography is so not his thing, and it's like, he did get dinged on that first Danzig record for not crediting Howling Wolf on what's the second to last song on the first side or whatever, but it's like Am I Demon or something like that, which is or he does like an what do they call it now legally? It's called an interlopation or something. If you quote, like in rap, they did that a lot of times where people would, like, if they were like all of a sudden did a verse where they just kind of took a couple notes for something. Well, he kind of did that too, but they had called him out about that because Led Zeppelin, I think I'm repeating myself, Led Zeppelin had done that on their first record too. But he, a lot of those Danzig solo records, if you go listen, they're like riffs on some of the songs are basically Black Sabbath songs.
Right, or they're riffs of like that sort of deep Delta bluesy kind
right.
of, yeah.
I mean, the Golden thing is sad because it's like he really should, especially since he didn't really. You don't change, it's like I think there's some rule about in fair use is if you take something and you change it. And it doesn't, I don't think it falls within the realm of fair use.
There's a, in copyright law, if you take an image and you copy it in a way, or if you create a new image that looks almost identical to an original image, you would, you're supposed to give credit, right?
Right.
You're supposed to say, this was inspired by, or this comes after such and such artist did a certain thing, and this is in graphic art, right? So one of a long time ago, I wrote a paper in college about this, and one of the examples, there was two different examples. One was the G.I. Joe comic book cover. So J. Scott Campbell did a poster that ultimately wound up being used later on by IDW, but it was his version of G.I. Joe #1 from the 80s that Herb Trimpe had drawn. Okay. And so he did his version of it, and it's the tank and the people
I know. I love that issue.
Yeah, I know, and it's a great.
I've got the Marvel Treasury.
Yeah. See, edition. Yeah, and so he did this new version, and he, by his signature on the piece of art, it says after Trimpe, right? Acknowledging that Herb Trimpe created the original, and that he was, doing his riff on it. And then ultimately, yes, it was through the same parent company, and so there was a lot less legal wrangling. But if he were to have released that on his own, Marvel might have had a beef because he was using the characters. But Trimpe wouldn't have had a beef because he was ripping off his graphics, right?
I see.
And so, but because it was all in-house, there was no deal. Now, there was also a similar lawsuit, or there was a similar situation where there was a lawsuit about, there was a girl in Seattle who was selling T-shirts that had the Starbucks siren logo, and it said corporate whore instead of Starbucks coffee.
Right.
And the siren was like holding a cell phone and a cup, right? But from a distance, it looked exactly like a Starbucks logo. And so she was sued by Starbucks. She was given a cease and desist. And the outcome of that court case was she can make that all day long. she just can't make money off of it, right? And so that's the thing. So what she had to redo her business model, that when she was selling those shirts, they had to be at cost, and she had to prove that those shirts were at cost. Otherwise, she would be in violation of copyright. So Danzig is somewhere in between all that, right? He took the logo, or he took the art from Golden, and he's using it for his own thing, but he's not giving any credit, and he's definitely making a profit.
Right.
So that's where I think, yeah, you're right. The Republic cereal stuff is all public domain now.
Right.
Like, none of that stuff is, I don't even think anybody holds copyright to the Crimson Ghost anymore, except, well, the Misfits now. But
and you want to hear the irony is, today is the anniversary of the first showing of a Crimson Ghost.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I found a Twitter called This Day in Danzig.
Oh, no.
And that was the thing that came out today, today of all days. But, sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's fine. Yeah, no. But so like I get the old school stuff, and again, did the Misfits really make that much money when they were the original Misfits in 77, 78? Like, maybe they covered their recordings, maybe they cover the cost of a guitar here and there, but they weren't selling the t-shirts and the posters and the action figures and all the things that they've been selling since the 90s, right? So you can kind of let that one go. That's a pass. Yeah. But the Golden thing, starting with Sammy and going into the Danzig solo records, I feel like even maybe he thought he could get away with it, but when you get called out, just say, you know what, you're right. This is a Michael Golden thing, and I love it. And, there's 100 ways around it. You could just say, man, his art is so inspiring to me, and I loved it, and I saw that skull, and it was the coolest thing. I just had to have it. And here's $50. And Michael probably would have walked away going, that's cool. I got acknowledged by a rock star, and like whatever. And maybe a few dollars change hands here and there, but or going forward, he gets 1% of all Danzig T-shirt sales or whatever, right? But he just, like you say, he doubled down on it's mine.
It's like, that's the thing. It's like so many people, and I don't really have a lot of good data, and I'm not going to name names because I'm just doing this extemporaneously, but there seems to be a lot of guys in the original punk era that grew up to be carnivorous businessmen, especially with other people's property. I was going to say, I don't even want to name it, but there's a person, that apparently was a well-known, guy who was a video company that he basically sponsored the beginning of his video company by ripping off a bunch of punk bands. Now, this is all, this is all just hearsay as far as I'm concerned, but It's like you hear these stories where it's like one member kind of absconds with the master tapes, and I mean, obviously we've got the Dead Kennedys issue, and then and Danzig and the Misfits, and I don't know, I mean a lot of these kind of like in the SST bands, all the stuff with Greg Ginn supposedly a couple years ago doing fair use complaints on people's behalf that he had no interest in.
Really?
Like, that's why all of a sudden it's like certain like bands, certain old punk videos will just disappear from YouTube because apparently he learned how to do copyright strikes, and he was hitting them. Now, this is all hearsay. Don't sue me. But, it's the kind of thing where I think it's almost like, I always heard the story about Chuck Berry back in the day. He got ripped off so much that later on he showed up, where's my money? I don't even put my coat down until there's some money.
Right.
So and I'm sure comic artists have that too. So it's like that thing where it's like old punks that got ripped off or did ripping off with another industry where there's a whole lot of people, literally, what is it? They call it getting the finger or whatever, the Bill finger, getting ripped off for Batman. So it's kind of like, I'm not excusing Danzig stuff, but it's like, it's funny. There's obviously, like, he's got a posture. He's like, I got ripped off. I'm not going to get ripped off by some comic artist. I changed that,
Right, and he did. I mean, it's interesting because Danzig seems to wind up in a lot of lawsuits with a lot of people. And, like, the whole Rick Rubin thing and Deaf American and how, he left that label and fought with those guys, because he claimed that there was royalties that were not paid to the band, and he sued the Misfits to keep them from playing as the Misfits because he supposedly owned the Misfits, and then all that went down, and then what he did was when that whole case was ended, the whole deal was Danzig gets a percentage of anything the Misfits do going forward as payment for use of the logo and the name. And then what he did after that was he released the box set, and then he put out 12 Hits from Hell, and he re-released all this old stuff that he owned that was prior to the agreement.
Yeah.
And the Misfits were popular at that time in the late 90s, you know. They just reformed, and they were actually doing pretty well on Geffen Records and all that stuff. And he just capitalized on all that, and he pulled all that crap out of the basement, like you say, all the tapes that he had, you know, that he had spirited away in the middle of the night, you know, in the 70s. And he released all these things and got paid, and then the band was like, "You can't do that. We have an agreement." And he's like, "The agreement clearly states anything recorded before, you know, 1996 is my property," and you can do like all this stuff. I mean, he's
kind of an asshole. I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Well, you know, it's funny you mention that because, you know, in these interviews, somebody had referenced this lawsuit. And I don't know, because I knew there's been several lawsuits with him, but he kind of goes, "Yeah, we got a deal where they gotta like tell people that I'm not in the band, and they're not doing that right now, so we might have to have a talk." And it was this kind of thing where it was like, they're not, you know, at some point he was like, you know, they came up with a deal, like thing where you have to go, so-and-so, you have to put the name of all the people on the band, which I guess I remember that they were very forthright about when they reemerged, having like Dr. Chud and, you know, like, I was like, why are they telling me who's in the band? Because usually when these bands reform, they go out of their way to not tell you that, like, oh yeah, we ditched, like, it's just the drummer.
Right.
You know, it's Quiet Riot with Frankie Banali and like 3 guys that did Sheetrock last week.
Yeah, totally.
You gotta watch that. You gotta watch the Quiet Riot documentary. I'm literally like not far off from the reality of what Quiet Riot, which was a band
right. And one song.
They were terrible.
Yeah.
Why do they? I'm sorry, Frankie Banali. I know you're probably a big podcast listener.
It's this nostalgia wagon. Everybody's on it. Yeah.
So, if you know anything about Danzig the actor? Because I mean, I know of him in 3 things.
Right, he played
2 things.
He played a fallen angel in one of the
Prophecy
movies.
And he has like one line. He's like, "Good, long time no see, Daniel." And then some actor rips his heart out or something.
Yeah, he doesn't last very long in that.
Yeah, he's got the Joss Whedon angel like demon makeup.
Right.
And I'm sure it's just like, but
just to cover up his big forehead.
Yeah, exactly. The one that's just like,
it keeps going back and back.
Like, yeah, it just keeps going like all the way back.
Why doesn't he keep combing it over like he had it in the Misfits?
Yeah, I know.
That's right, because he got a nose job and he doesn't have to comb his hair over anymore.
Well, let me finish the acting thing because I want to get to the nose job because if we're going to go dark.
Yeah. Well, then he was also in Portlandia. Right. Which was interesting. And then he did the Aqua Teen Hunger Force. He voiced himself.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. I guess that's technically acting.
And then, he did the voiceover for himself. And then there was the whole X-Men thing in the 90s.
That's what I wanted to get into. So,
there's a couple of different takes on that.
I've
read 2 different things. I read one that he was cast and that the movie was in pre-production in the 90s and then it all fell through. And then the other thing I've heard is he was asked to audition and he turned it down because he was busy touring.
Yeah.
But either way, I remember, again, back in the throes of my Danzig fandom where he could do no wrong and he was like everything.
Right.
Like, I felt like he would have been a great Wolverine because he was the right height. Right? Because Wolverine was actually a short dude.
Right.
Yeah. And of course he had the build. Young Danzig, was ripped. And he had those crazy sideburns, right? Like he had the Wolverine sideburns already.
He had the... God, somebody had actually referred to, and I completely spaced on it, that it was one of the guys that tours with him now, Tommy Victor, the guy from Prong.
Yeah, Prong, yeah.
Mentioned, he's a big fan of, and he mentioned a singer, and I think he was with the Trogs or something.
Oh, no.
And if you go look, he's got
the same big...
He's got those big, crazy... And I used to, I didn't understand those sideburns for years. I thought that was like I was misunderstanding, he had put his hair behind his ears or something.
Right.
And I'm like, he does that on purpose? I mean, like, and I had a friend, like, he was like my Danzig friend when we were in high school, and it was like, and he was like trying to emulate him. It didn't look anything like Danzig, but he would always try to, like, he grew his fingernails out and
no, it looked like the devil.
And he would he would like walk around. He'd like walk around with a crucifix net. We tried to have a band, but it just didn't work. But it was like,
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like he played bass, and he would like tune to like he would tune to a riff, so that when you go to play it, the whole thing would be out of. He tuned it so he could play this one riff quite easily without moving up and down the neck. So when you try to play normally, it's like that's not how this works. That's not how it works, dude. But you couldn't convince him. But yeah. What's my point? Oh, the acting, the Wolverine thing. I had heard that initially because was there a version of that movie that was supposed to go, and then Bryan Singer came in later and did this, or was he because I thought they tried to develop it earlier.
It was much earlier because I remember in the days of Science Fiction Age magazine, right, back in the 90s, when he was starting to, it was right around the height of his popularity, Danzig 2, Danzig 3-ish maybe, Danzig 3, like where he sort of was writing that, I'm a rock star, I'm friends with Metallica, like we're ruling the world kind of thing. There had been talks at that time to make an X-Men movie.
Okay.
And I believe that, rights were acquired.
James Cameron involved?
Maybe,
because I know he did a Spider-Man.
That was terrible.
Right. But I thought he also had the X-Men at some point.
Well, that might have been part of all that, because I know that was sort of an era where, Star Trek was huge. Star Wars was dead, but Star Trek was huge. It was in the Babylon 5 era. It was when, sort of the sci-fi geeky thing was really starting to catch hold. And people were saying, this is a viable genre that we can make money on. And people had started to say, why has there only ever been, Superman and Batman movies? And this is also shortly after the Michael Keaton, Batman.
Right.
That whole, like, Tim Burton, oh my God, and Tim Burton was going to make the Superman movie and all that stuff that ultimately disappeared. So it was all in that era where comic book properties were really starting to get a serious eye from Hollywood, and I don't know ultimately what killed this initial project, if it was owners or legal agreements or things going on with the studios and the comic book companies or whatever. I don't know what happened, but I do remember that in several trade type magazines, whether they be science fiction books or comic book trade things like previews or whatever, where they were talking about there's going to be an X-Men movie, there's going to be, and people were, Marvel were talking about it, and it was in pre-production, and these are the people we're looking at and the roles, and they had talked about Danzig as Wolverine, and everybody was like, oh my God, he's a perfect visual, he fits the aesthetic of the short Canadian crazy animal, and it's like, and then it all just went away.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously that's a lot to do with the movie industry, but I always remember, like, at the time, that came up in an interview with him, and he was like, yeah, of course. It's like, are you going to play Wolverine? Yeah. Why wouldn't I? I'm perfect for the role.
Right.
And that kind of, to me, that almost felt like, oh, that's the death knell of any person with no acting chops. Right. And maybe that was around the time that he had been in the Prophecy too, thinking like, and it hadn't come out yet, and people were like, well, he's doing movies now, so maybe they're like testing him out on this Dimension film knockoff before they bring him into the big leagues. But I've never heard anybody talk about that but him, really. You know what I mean? Except but it's like,
since then, yeah,
right? Because I've always, saw this interview with Hugh Jackman. Basically, it was like a clickbait article where he had talked how he had some interaction with James Purefoy that was cast, and then they had to recast. I forget why it was. There was a different guy playing Wolverine before Hugh Jackman. Okay. It's like one of those situations like when, Viggo Mortensen came in like 2 weeks into production after they'd already cast Aragorn. Stuart Townsend was playing him or something. And but they never mention anybody else ever being cast. But again, that it's Hollywood and they like to create their own mythology. Maybe of course, when you're dealing with a place that likes to create their own mythology and a guy that likes to create his own mythology.
That's true.
That being said, I tried to find out if I could figure out why he went with the last name Danzig, and he's being interviewed on this thing, and he clams up and basically says, "It's a family thing. I don't want to talk about it." And you're just like, "Whoa!" And he got like serious like with the guy.
Well, and so I have a theory about that because that's what I do. So all the guys, obviously in the Misfits, they went and did the name change deal, and I like the Doyle and Jerry are the Ciafros or Fieros. I forgot.
I love the origin of the Jerry only name. But.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, part of the shtick or whatever, but there's been some accusations in the past of Danzig being a racist. Okay, and it has to do with he did a song, I think, with or for, excuse me, Johnny Cash.
Okay.
Called White Devil. And it's basically a song about white race. It's like a race war, basically. The whites uprising and all this stuff. Right?
Okay.
And he got dragged through the coals on that pretty hard. Because they're like, well, what are you saying? What are you saying? And he's like, it's just one of those things, like, be careful what you wish for, like this and that. And it was, during a time, probably around, Rodney King-ish. And so, like, there were some issues there. But Danzig, the city in Poland, right? Mm-hmm. The free city of Danzig was a lightning rod of Nazism, and there's a whole historical thing about how Hitler wanted Danzig. It was part of the Anschluss. It was part of the reunification plan, right?
Okay.
It was a group of free Germans living in a town that was on the Black Sea, and they wanted it as a port, and so it was part of conquering. I believe it was Poland, part of the Poland plan, and part of their Europe. Again, forgive me, I don't have a map in front of me, but it was part of their early conquest plans in the 30s, because they wanted this port city, and then the city of Danzig wound up changing all of its, like, after they were captured by the Nazis, they were reunited or whatever. They were all very open and happy to be associated with the Third Reich, and they changed all the city iconography to the SS skull. Like, the city flag became this big black flag with the SS skull and the runes and all this stuff, and it became sort of the de facto capital of Nazi Europe outside of Germany.
Okay.
And I don't know if, my theory is Danzig probably didn't know that when he changed his name to that. It just sounds like a cool, like... Right.
It sounds like a powerful name.
It sounds powerful, sounds partially evil, it's whatever, but I don't know if he really understood that or not. But then when these other things came around, it sort of re-shone the light on that. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, well, this city, the free city of Danzig, and the history of that in World War II is not a real pleasant one. And it sort of ties into these accusations of, white supremacy and racism. And, and I don't know if maybe that's why he's just like, I don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
But, that could be it. But it's like, the guy named, I don't know.
Or it could just be, he read it in a book.
He was like looking through it.
Well, that sounds
cool.
It's interesting. I mean, there's, and God, this is a subject for a whole nother day about, like, the flirtations with, iconography of heavy metal bands, and there's like one of the band
Motorhead,
Motorhead, and the band Wehrmacht, and Kiss, even Kiss. I mean, I just finished. I think we were talking about this a couple of days ago about the Paul Stanley his autobiography, and he had totally admitted that, like, they kind of stole the two S's on Kiss
from the SS.
From the SS, and like in Israel and in Germany, it's the S's are different when they do the posters. And like, you know, Slayer had the stuff, but yeah, I know it's hard to know how much of that is just. Well, I'm not going to make excuses for him. You know what I mean? It's like this is like a golden thing where I'm like, well, like let's look at it the other way. My point is being that how much of this is him kind of knowing what it is, or having it be like a situation where like, well, I just kind of like the typeset, or you know, or I like the way it rolls off the tongue.
Well, and that's the thing is, you know, there's a there's a long tradition in music of people changing their names to something that, like you say, is that rolls off the tongue or looks good on an album cover or whatever, or sounds different. And there's people, you know, in the history of the music industry, people trying to get away from an ethnic identity or being tied into something, so they change their names to something more palatable for the public. And you go back in the 40s and 50s, look at, you know, guys, a lot of the Italian dudes changing their names and Jewish people changing their names so they don't, you know, stand out as being something different or whatever. They try and mainstream themselves.
Right.
And I think that, you know, part of the aesthetic of metal and this dark music is you change your name to something else. I mean, you know, and especially in a band like the Misfits where your shtick is, you know, horror or, you know, that, I mean, it's like Marilyn Manson, like that whole thing, right?
Right.
You know, it's like
Brian. Who wants to buy an album by a guy named Brian Warner?
Yeah, the Brian Warner Project. You're like, oh, I'll play that in the elevator.
Nice
You're like, yeah, no,
nice fusion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so I don't know. I mean, I don't have any, you know, real inside knowledge or opinion on that. I just know that, you know, that there is a historical significance to the name Danzig. I just don't know how cognizant Glenn really was of that. And like you say, there's no proof of anything other than, you know, he just changed his name because it sounds better than Anzalone and the angry Goombas, you know. And there's nothing there, but I could see how people tend to pile on, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, you're a white supremacist. Oh, and your name's Danzig. Were you some kind of Nazi?
Right,
you know,
right,
come on, you know, like. So I don't know, but
yeah, I know
it's all mutterings.
It's
and
not.
murmurs.
It's, you know, a lot of that kind of stuff. It's kind of. Yeah, it's again. It's either there, and you know it's in your face, and you're not picking up on it, or you're like looking for threads, and it's hard to know. Right. And I would never want to impugn a guy who's never directly said anything. But yeah, it's it's interesting because it's like he's kind of had a renaissance in a strange way, and not that his music is ever really. It's like the music industry is in shambles, and for whatever it is, but it's interesting to like kind of doing this deep dive of videos, kind of seeing that like if you watch like the early 70s or the 70s era of him when he was, and he's he was back in when he was like the young skinny punk. He was a pretty good looking guy, and but then it's like at a certain point, like you were saying, it's like when did he have this nose job? Do you know?
I believe it was prior to Danzig 1 coming out. Okay. It might have been during the Samhain years.
All right.
But it was definitely after Misfits. Because if you look at all the old photographs, and another reference that I don't have, but I would like to actually get my hands on is Eerie Von put out a large book of his personal photographs.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of Misfits era stuff in there. But if you go look at all the old black and white photos of them playing shows, and you see Glenn definitely has a different nose when he was in the Misfits. And I don't know exactly when that transition, but if the Misfits ended in roughly 85-ish, and Samhain was going on simultaneously in 86, and then Samhain was going on simultaneously in 88 when the first Danzig album came out, because Final Descent was released after Samhain broke up and Danzig was formed, and they started recording as Danzig. So it's kind of like there's a weird overlap period there, but sure enough, first Danzig album, first Danzig video, new nose, She Rides, who knows? Yeah.
Well, okay, so we gotta talk about She Rides real quick, but I want to finish this other thought. Is that so in the 70s, like these little interviews, like he just seemed like a kind of a childish, kind of a fun guy.
He was a teenager.
He's a like thing. But then it's like he did kind of like that. His midpoint was that kind of like just sullen, where he was actually more of what you would call a stereotypical teenager, even though he was in his 20s and 30s,
right,
of being like, yeah, no, maybe so, kind of thing. But now it's like funny how he seems to, now he's in his 50s and 60s, he's pivoted kind of being back to being kind of like the fun guy again.
Right.
Which is strange.
He has a sense of humor.
Because the thing about me is like, I grew up, and again, it was that X factor of like, what is this guy up to? And, you know, I didn't know anything about it except as like, I'm evil. But it's kind of nice where it's like, because the shtick he doesn't need the shtick anymore. No. But like he's been in Portlandia, and he played a character. He's been on the Aqua Teens, you know, playing himself. But yeah, he's much. And I saw him doing like a little thing on Rolling Stone magazine a couple years ago, and he had said like, yeah, just like it's great the kids are still out there listening to it. And I'm like, what the hell? This is the guy that'd be like pouring acid on people for.
Right. And it's interesting to see, and this happens to a lot of artists, but it's interesting to see how he's gained the perspective in his old age. You know? Yeah. And whether or not he believed at any moment when he was recording with the Misfits that he was going to live forever, or that he was going to be this influential as a musician, it's nice to see him getting that due, and it's nice to see him acknowledging it and not still being the dick that he was in those early years where, like you say, he just pops the collar on his jean jacket and goes, yeah, and that was like the most you were going to get out of him. Yeah, and it is interesting because, you know, when you do look at the Misfits in the early days, he's wearing a Captain Harlock t-shirt, right? Mm-hmm. You saw him smile.
Right.
A lot.
He was constantly smiling. And you put Danzig Young, and it's just smile. It's all fun. It's Vincent Price and, you know, Incredible Shrinking Man type thing. But it's so funny because, again, that was not the band I thought I was engaging with in 1987. Right. I was in the middle of his kill you for looking at me crossways.
And again, I think a lot of this has to do with, you know, his people thought that when the Misfits were done, that the persona rock was over with him, right? And that he was, you know, like, okay, the Misfits was this thing where people painted their faces and they sang about horror movies, and it was like, oh, isn't that great? And it was sort of like the Poor Man's Kiss. It was like they had a stage persona that they played into, and they had their own these weird names and da-da-da. Okay. Then Samhain, nobody knew about Samhain. Like, Samhain is this weird thing. Like, nobody knew about it, and everybody listens to Samhain, except for Rick Rubin, because that's where he discovered Glenn. But everybody goes back to Samhain and experiences it in this weird way. Like, I enjoyed the Misfits, I like Danzig, but there was this other thing he did. I'm going to go back, and it's almost unlistenable. Right, you could almost it's almost terrible, right?
I don't like it, to be perfectly frank.
There's only one or two tracks that I like, and then there's, of course, the stuff that he wrote. He had originally written for the Misfits that he performed as Samhain, or stuff that he wrote as Samhain that he ultimately performed as Danzig. But there's those transitional end pieces that are okay, but then there's just some weird stuff. I refer to it as bad tonal poetry. Like, he's out there experimenting with crap, and they're banging on things, and they're shouting, and you're like, okay, that's cool. I get it. Like, you're an artist going through your phase. It's Andy Warhol eating a cheeseburger. I don't understand it. I don't like it, but apparently that's art, so let's go with it. You know, and you know, they were covered in blood out on the stage and all this stuff and whatever. So he clearly didn't get rid of the persona between Misfits and Samhain. But I think with the Danzig thing, everybody finally was like, okay, he's out of that phase. This is rocker Danzig, and this is our guy. I think it was just another character. He became another character.
Right.
He's the Satan guy who likes all the porn stars around him, and he you know, and he's like got all this S&M imagery, and he's, you know, like, and that got weirder as you want to talk about the videos. Yeah. That got weirder as it goes on.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, I'm not an expert on those videos, but again, in my research, I came across a video off the first record called She Rides, which is a great song. It's kind of like a it's basically like an amped up late 80s version of a 50s torch song to a woman kind of thing.
Right.
But the video, I'm really glad I never saw it.
Exactly.
It would have ruined that band for me. If that would have been my first experience, I would have just said, forget it. Because it's like he's got the shirt off. There's a lot of
real bad close-ups of his face.
There's a lot of bad close-ups of his face where he's kind of making a motion that somehow he's grinding his hips. Like
right.
It's like he's humping.
Right.
And it's like in time with the music. And then, at that time, I was pivoting out of that mid-'80s glam rock, White Snake, Tawny Katane on the Jaguar kind of thing. I had already made a decision, like, I don't like that stuff. That's just BS. That's crap. And so if I had been like, Danzig, and then it had been like, he has these models in there dancing that they all kind of look like, I don't know, something out of Easy Rider magazine. They all have tattoos back
before it was cool for women to have tattoos.
Where it's just like, very typical, like, I'll take that one, and it's on their butt cheeks because all the girls are wearing, G-strings, and they're dancing, and they're not, maybe it's because of the composition of the 4:3 screen, but the girls barely move their hips within half an inch because they can't move, and they seem uncomfortable in the video, and
it's like a Robert Palmer video gone wrong.
Yeah, it's like a Robert Palmer video that somebody did in their garage.
Yeah, it's like these girls are all, or ladies, women, are all kind of clones of one another, right? They all have a similar body size and facial structure and coloration. They're all brunettes or redheads, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all wearing some kind of leather thing, whether it be a thong or a bra or whatever. And they're all dancing really terribly. So it's not like he could even afford the good strippers at that point because they can't even dance.
Right.
And then there was the one who's actually behind the drum kit next to Chuck.
Oh, is that the one she's like throwing her head and stuff like
She's
that?
kind of doing this weird thing, very much in time with the music, but it almost looks like a seizure. Right, and then the whole thing where the one girl is massaging Danzig's back and she touches his Devilman tattoo and he turns around and gives you the little wink. You're like,
no, it comes off.
I know. Yeah, you're like what?
Yeah, it's like that weird. Kind of like, even though that yes, there is a kind of like a raw sexuality to his music and that stuff. I guess that isn't something I wanted to have, especially at as a 15-year-old, or I wouldn't want that to have. If that had been dictated to me like that,
right.
the smoke would have gone away, and I would have just been like, oh, he's like Lawrence Cherry Pie except slower,
right?
And it's funny because
Lawrence Cherry Pie video was way better and it had much higher production values,
right.
And the women could actually dance. I mean, it was the same thing. It was the same concept.
Yeah.
It was just like
it's just funny because you think I honestly at the time I thought maybe I was. In my own kind of weird way, I thought like going into that harder stuff was almost like my kind of like, well, that's kind of like a feminist view because like I'm eschewing Motley Crue and their dancing stripper videos, and I listen to like serious music like Danzig, and then again if the video, then again it's like I don't think we ever saw the Mother video because the chicken gets sacrificed or something.
Right.
So I don't think we ever saw that.
All that stuff was pretty much straight to home video.
Right. Yeah, I think the only time I ever finally saw that was you remember the Hard and Heavy VHSs?
Hard and Heavy, no.
So basically, they were the equivalent of like a YouTube video, but they would or a Headbangers Ball, but for like they were R-rated,
right?
And they were like $24, so I never bought one, but I had a friend that bought one, and it had like and it was funny too because it was whoever like had content that wouldn't make it on TV. So some guy named Rhett Forrester, and he had a video where he'd be on a table and women would be pouring water on him, and then there'd be like, and then there was literally like a thing where Lemmy was talking about how much he liked Jack Daniels or something like that, and he drinks like half a bottle while he's sitting there talking, and then there was the
typical rock stars,
the uncensored Mother video, which I think had maybe an exposed breast and some extra blood. But it's like, so those videos, even though we'd known that they'd been censored, it was like those never factored into my appreciation of that aesthetic. So it was kind of like that thing where it was like, Hit Parader magazine would have a couple shots. I mean, the truth is that band, that early band, they were all a bunch of chuds. I mean, they were not good-looking dudes.
No.
No offense to no offense to those guys, but they were kind of weird guys.
Well, and it's true. They're basically the guys that benefit from their fame, right? It's like, well, look at Gene Simmons, right?
Right.
Like, take the makeup off and, oh my God, what the hell? But he's famous. He's going to get the ladies.
Was there a video for Twisted Cane?
I believe so.
I don't really remember it now that I'm thinking of it. Or was that the one with the chicken? No, the mother. I don't know. It's
I think the mother one might have had some breast in it.
Yeah,
Twisted Cane's probably the one with the sacrifice. And the thing is, like, I remember you talking about the adult video or whatever. I remember the whole reason why half of the people I know who were into Danzig at the time, who were also young teenage boys, bought the Danzig 3 box set, was simply because it came with the rated R version of the Dirty Black Summer video.
Okay.
Which had the weird naked chick in the Giger head mask.
I don't think I may have seen that. You know, that's the weird thing about my thing with Danzig and that whole stuff is, like, by that time, by the end of Lucifuge or whatever, I'd already kind of moved on to whatever, like, I'm gonna listen to, like, you know, Mudhoney and Nirvana, and it all started to feel like his kind of whatever, his Satanism or whatever, his fake Satanism. It felt a little played out, but the downside is I really missed that third one. That third Danzig record is really good.
It's very good.
And I feel like, oh man, I've been sleeping on this thing for 20 years or 25 years. And it's like, yeah, that was the same band too. I mean, it was the
same. That was the last full lineup. Well, no, 4. I think 4 still had Eerie Von. I think Biscuits left after 3. I think they got a new drummer for 4.
So, did you watch that? Well, you probably didn't. It was there's a clip I'm watching, and I should give. For people who want a primer on the albums, which I'm not going to give you, the Danzig primer album. There's a guy in full props. He's kind of he's a total Hesher guy named, I guess he goes by the name Razor Fist, and he's he's a brusque young man who's very opinionated, to say the least. I'm not going to get into all the minutia, but he plays a lot of great clips in his video where he goes through all the Danzig albums and talks about them. But he plays a clip where he basically, you know, as time went on, he started shedding band members and bringing on new, and it's an interview of them somebody asking like about the old band or something, and like you were saying, like, and he had a total, like, his band at a certain point, they all look like extras from The Sopranos, you know, with the spiky hair, like they're all like, their hair's all thinning, so they just do that thing where it's like they try to like make it as big as possible, and they're all talking, and somebody said something like, oh, you know, you just want to talk about Chuck Biscuits, you just love like John Christ and Chuck Biscuits, and this is Danzig taunting this interviewer, you want to suck their dicks, and you're just like, whoa, where did this come from? Like, he was, you know, it's like that idea, like, I'm the band. It doesn't matter who else is in the band. I'm the band.
Well, and it's funny because depending on who you read or listen to, that when he changed, or when the name of the band changed from Samhain to Danzig, the common retelling of it is that Rick Rubin wanted to sign Glenn to a record deal, and just him, and he was going to go the full modern Danzig route, which is you write the music, you record it in your studio and do all this stuff, and then when we go on tour, we'll hire 3 sheetrockers from Lodi and we'll go out and we'll do it, right? And Glenn at the time was very attached to Eerie Von and said, if you sign me, you're signing Eerie, right? And that was how that worked. But the compromise was, was that Rubin said, change the name to Danzig, so that way, as you go through this creative process, as you change your, your style, or you change your format, whatever, you can shed band members, and we don't have to worry about anything because it's your band, you know, and so therefore, you know, we don't have to ever do any rebranding every time you want to, go to like when he went to the whole techno metal thing,
Black Acid Devil. Yeah, I mean that's smart.
It's smart, but it's also a little narcissistic and also a little cutthroat because you're basically setting it up to where like the minute we don't like one of these guys, he's out. We'll keep doing it. We'll keep,
Well, wasn't one of the guys in Sam Hain like he had been in Minor Threat or something like that? Like,
I think so. Yeah,
he had some DC punk guys, like maybe even like a Reagan Youth guy.
Yeah, Reagan Youth was part of it.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, huh. So I don't know. Those guys kind of felt. I don't know. Like I said, that's my real blind spot is that Sam Hain thing because it was just one. Those records were impossible to find at that time when I was around. And two, you'd pick them up, and it's like, wait, half of these songs are Misfits songs. Why would I want to hear re-recordings? Because I kind of hate re-recordings of songs, which is why by the time Mother 94 came up, which is, to me, is like the metal equivalent of Don't Stand So Close to Me 86. Remember that? The Police, when they did their last song, where it's like, yeah, let's take everything that's cool about our hit and drain it.
Destroy it.
And just destroy it. But, yeah, that original, and I think that's, again, my kind of conservative idea of bands and stuff. When I look at stuff, I'm very much like I have this facade in my head that like, oh, when a band comes together, it's there. They all work it out together rather than the idea of. The truth is most bands are like 80% one person and 20% the other people. You know what I mean? I mean, it's different ratios for different bands. But I was thinking about, Alice Cooper band versus Alice Cooper when really it's like, Vince Fournier or whatever is the real artistic thrust behind that. And those guys were great musicians, but he was able to do it without them. Again, I'm not as huge a fan of like the post-classic Danzig era, but it's kind of, when I do dip into it, I'm like, actually, for the first couple songs of every one of those records, it pretty much just sounds like Danzig to me, except for the Black Acid Devil and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, there's something to be said. I know him and Eerie Von had some kind of big falling out.
Yeah, and that was weird because that was after 4. Vaughn left after 4, and then when Danzig 5, Black Acid Evil or Black Acid Devil, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah, I don't even know.
I don't even know. He went with a completely new group, and then he ditched that again. I think after that,
yeah,
or maybe 6, because then he brought in like you say Tommy Victor and the Prong dudes and. Yeah,
and Prong was definitely like one of those bands. Like it's funny too because I thought I was a Prong fan back in the '80s, but then later I was jumped ship on them pretty fast because they were like, I don't know, they were a weird group.
Well, yeah, but the thing like there's you say the albums and the different there's some nuggets on all of them, but I find that as we get farther away, as we get into the Red Death and whatever the most recent one, which I can't
even remember.
I can't remember the name.
I was listening to it today.
I know.
So that's not a great
sign, kids. When you're a lifetime Danzig fan, you don't remember the name. Yeah.
If you decide, if this sends you down a path, start at the beginning.
Definitely start at the beginning. But I mean, he's obviously. I mean, the guy's in his 60s now, and the fact. I mean. I hope that when I'm 60, I'm still walking and talking. He's still putting out albums. So there's something to be said for that. But as you get farther away from the beginning, I don't know if it's he doesn't have the energy anymore or if he's getting lazy or sloppy in his writing or a combination of both or whatever. But it just seems like that hard, deep blues rock of the first 3 albums is gone, and it's more of the it's almost like he's copying himself in a way now. He's almost become his own caricature.
Yeah, he knows the formula that he thinks.
Yeah, exactly.
I looked up I wanted to kind of look up and find out what people were up to at least from that early band. I guess I hadn't heard anything about Chuck Biscuits until there was a death hoax going. Did you hear about this?
I did not. No.
So about 5 years ago, somebody posted that he had died. Chuck Biscuits had died of throat cancer, and then his brother finally came out and said, "I saw my brother last week. He's fine." It's like, and then, but now I read on Wikipedia, someone said that he might have started the rumor himself.
Just to become relevant again?
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't know. I mean, he played with DOA. So, I mean, he's Canadian, right? Is he from Vancouver?
I think so.
Yeah, and he might have played with the Circle Jerks for a while. But he's been kind of off the radar for a while. But John Christ, I think he kind of left rock and roll, and he does like guitar lessons and does classical guitar at weddings and stuff, because it was like, I forget his real name, I had it written down somewhere, but he it's like a very kind of like, he's got the sensitive Cosby sweater on and his guitar.
He's a Huxtable now.
Yeah, and it's like, but I mean, he was a great guitar player, and that was the thing. It was like he was kind of playing beneath his skill in that band, because it's like a lot of kind of it's a more of a, that kind of music was more of a rhythmic kind of thing. It was like not a lot of notes and stuff like that, but I heard that he'd had like some kind of classical background, but apparently he didn't continue on after he left Danzig, so that's kind of...
Well, and it's interesting because Eerie Von, he went on and released a couple of solo albums that were very reminiscent of his time in Samhain. The first one he put out was called Uneasy Listening, and it was, again, more terrible atmospheric crap that's supposed to be horror inspired. I don't even think there was any lyrics. And then I think he would put out maybe Uneasy Listening 2 or something, I forget now, but he put out but he's transitioned now, he's doing dark country. And so he's got a couple of albums out now that are more country music, but it's kind of like almost in a way early Danzig, in the sense that it's kind of, again, trying to tap into those dark themes of, Mississippi Delta black magic-y kind of country, and I haven't listened, honestly, to any of it, for full disclosure. I've read some reviews of it, and I've, kind of read between the lines that there's a lot of raised eyebrows, like the fact that he's going the country route, but it's all also very much Darius Rucker in a way, like
right, yeah.
Everybody's like, he's doing what? And you're like, he's doing country, man. You're
it's like, because all those people that used to buy those records in the 90s, they got old and they don't want to listen to pop music and what's out there, what's on the radio that's kind of has that pop thing, and it's generally country. So I don't. What is it? Steven Tyler is supposedly now gone country. That's like a world I don't know those songs.
I don't either. But I guess maybe where do old goths go to die? They go to Eerie Von Country Ranch and Death Emporium.
Well, I think you can be. I think you can lose your hair and get fat and be in a country band. And whereas like heavy metal, it's always like a thing where it's like
you got to be a lean, hungry machine.
Either lean, or you have to get like an extensions or something. Have you ever gotten into any of those Black Aria albums he's done?
So, I enjoyed portions of the first one.
Okay,
like there's I think that so Glenn has 2 classical albums: Black Aria, Black Aria 2. Black Aria debuted at number 1 on the classical charts when it came out, which is crazy to me.
It probably means it sold more than 100 copies, because most like classical albums, it's like the same 5 dudes, cork sniffers.
And then maybe like 10 NPR stations or whatever, or local PBS stations or whatever. Which I find darkly humorous in a way, because here's this death metal-y Satan dude who has this really dark history and past or whatever, and he tries to put on this visage, and his most successful chart-wise, and that doesn't necessarily mean sales, but his most successful chart-wise was a classical album that was all done on synth.
Yeah, that was my thing about that really turned me off when I tried it out.
It's very
that I've had my share of synthesizers with bad string samples in them, and trying to go, if I just put some reverb on this, it'll sound real, and it's like, it never does. It's something about the way orchestrated synthesizer sounds. It's just, you can't, at least for me, I can't remove it to judge the piece, and it also it has a very kind of modern classical kind of idea where it almost sounds like you're not. It's not really a classical piece more than a score for a movie that doesn't exist, kind of thing.
Well, and he actually describes it like that.
Yeah.
If you read the liner notes, he talks about how it's my musical interpretation of the Fall of the Angels, or at least that's the first one.
Right.
The second one, I don't know what he was thinking, but the second one was not good.
Yeah, and to me, that's a lot of like people that don't. I mean, I'm definitely by no means of knowledgeable on classical music. It's just I notice a lot of times that people aren't primarily composers and they're songwriters when they become composers. I mean, as much as I like Frank Zappa, I find most of his modern classical to be very boring and kind of like a Muzak version of what they did in a rock band, where it's like, oh, you can see that this is the kind of riff that he likes to do, but now it's like dim 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 dim, and you're just like, oh man, I can never, because we used to
like the xylophone better on the Joe's Garage album.
Exactly. It's like when I used to work at the record store, we'd occasionally get people coming in looking for that black aria. Yeah. And I never even knew about it. I'm like, what? Danzig's Black Aria? It's like, I just had this idea of him sitting there with like with no shirt on, and is like, now here's the funny thing, how my brain did, that he wears like a weird neckerchief, like in those videos, like he has like a string around his neck when he's got his shirt off. I always interpreted that, because I used to watch on somebody's little TV, that he had a bow tie.
Oh, no.
And it was like, why is he just sitting there with no shirt on and a bow tie? Like
it's a Chippendales
like
review.
He's a Chippendales guy. And it's just like, but that's why I kind of envision him with the black aria, with like a black libretto open, and he's like with his little stick, and he's going, doot, 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 doot. It's my black aria. Hey, yeah, it's gonna be a scream in the third measure. Scream for me, baby. So we kind of got off of the video thing. What was the
really quickly though, just to put a bow on that, no pun intended. I would very much be interested in hearing Black Aria 1 performed by an actual orchestra, and I think that at that point you could probably make a final judgment on whether it's any good.
Exactly.
Yeah, but as a synth piece, it almost feels like it's music that was cut from Clockwork Orange soundtrack. Okay. It's like not good enough to be used in the synth pop soundtrack for Clockwork Orange.
Oh, that's kind of it's like I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say. So let's go back to the videos.
Yes.
I think so. I don't know as much about these as you. Maybe you've probably watched more of them than I have. I've seen was it Can't Speak?
Speak was that weird sort of sci-fi one where he's coming in and out of the sand. It looked like a Tool video.
Yeah, he's like, it's like, I mean, metal and hard rock was in such a weird place around the aughts.
Yeah.
Grunge, for lack of a better term, I know that that's a weird umbrella. But, I mean, there's nothing more than, like, the children of metal, vis-a-vis grunge, they basically killed their parents in some kind of Greek tragedy. They put them all out on the unemployment line, ended up making them open up for them half the time. Yep. And they had their own hand in their demise about, even like, they had the best intentions. I'm sure that Chuck D and Scott Ian thought, hey, let's do a collaboration and it'll be great. And it was at the time, but it's like they also didn't know that they were going to be create Korn. And,
right, exactly. If they had known.
And I shouldn't pick on Korn as much as like Limp Bizkit and Wheatus and all these like millions of bands I don't even know, because I worked in a record store during that time, and it was horrid during the new metal phase, and a lot of that unfortunately sent a lot of classic acts like Slayer and everybody, it's like that. And there was tendrils of that back in the 80s when Faith No More came out,
right?
Because as much as I loved that they were an amalgam, the only thing that was all great for them, but what happened, it caused a million bands to
rip it off,
to tell their bass player, hey, why don't you try slapping and popping this time?
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh god.
They were even a ripoff of what's his name? Oh my god, Sailing the Seas of Cheese.
Primus.
Primus, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was even a ripoff of Primus, because that guy took the ripping and slapping and things.
Oh yeah, and that guy had been like doing that since the 80s. Yeah. And the funny thing is that he had of course, Primus, their bona fides in metal is, well, at least for the guitar player, Larry Lalonde. He started the band Possessed, which was considered one of the first like satanic black metal thrash bands.
Okay.
So he's always disavowed that, though, so much so he won't even license tracks from that record.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. But yeah, Les Claypool he played in progressive like metal bands and weird stuff like that too before.
Well, he even auditioned for
yeah,
Metallica.
Yeah. And apparently he was slapping and popping doing that.
They were like,
stuff.
dude, that's not metal. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing where it's like, it was so cool because even pre-internet, people were starting to go like, they were reaching back, they were reaching forward, they were reaching cross genres, and even like to more like African musics and stuff. Like I remember like listening to Afro pop on NPR. I mean, just because it was like people would talk about like, you got to hear African music if you want to hear good rhythms. So it was like, it was a great time pre-internet for music, but in some thing it didn't cause it, but a lot of people trying to like stick 15 genres into a song kind of created this weird thing where a lot of bands were starting to question, like, should I be changing styles? And I think Danzig kind of suffered from that with like a lot of that techno stuff because of 9 Inch Nails, obviously.
Right. Well, that was huge. Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different genre or whatever, industrial metal, and it's definitely not something that I was so beyond that by the time it came out.
I enjoyed Ministry.
Okay, yes.
And
I liked Ministry. I would say yes.
That was kind of early. And again, I mean, everything that came after that kind of stuff was kind of, a bad imitation. But yeah, no, 9 Inch Nails I didn't really enjoy at all. Actually, I like Johnny Cash's version of "Hurt" better. Yeah. But but it's true. I think Glenn, in a very middle-aged man kind of way, did a desperate run to stay relevant.
Yeah.
And his fans were like, "No," and that's why, that's the only album that is really like that.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is that's the beginning of. Not necessarily people making records in their front rooms, although it kind of was, but Pro Tools where people would stop using tape and you could do cut-ups and hard edits and things that would used to be a pain in the butt to do, it became, all of a sudden, it's like the toolbox is open, but they're all weird tools. Right. It's like, if you need...
Or you have people who don't know necessarily how to use them or what the tools are for.
Right.
They're throwing crap together anyway.
Or like, let's just throw like this weird sound on the guitar where it doesn't even sound like a guitar, and you're just like, oh, this is too much at once. and I don't. But I remember seeing that Can't Speak, and that was definitely that video when it came out. It definitely made me go, oh, I'm all right with the fact that I jumped ship on Danzig. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It wasn't in his mad dash to be kind of stay relevant. He kind of. To his fan base, but I mean, you got to do what you got. Even Slayer sold out a little bit for some of their records. They did a new metal record, so it's not that he did new metal, but it's kind of like indicative of like, well, it's amazing that he, even though his career has kind of gone in weird places, it's amazing he's survived because so many of those people have just like said, I'm going to go get a haircut and work for a startup, right. Or whatever. But he was always so far. He'd already been through punk and metal and, 5 different iterations of the genre. It's like, well, I'm too old to relearn how to do anything but try new things.
And he's definitely not cutting his hair.
Yeah.
So, like Metallica did. Mm-hmm. I remember that controversy. God, man. That went around the lunchroom in high school like crazy.
Oh, Lord.
He thought the world had ended.
Exactly.
But, yeah, the other thing, that his 6 and 7. So, Satan's Child.
What year was that one?
Satan's Child was in 2001. 2002. I was living in West Virginia and I had that, so it was between 2000 and 2002 when that album came out. That one started to
So it came out in 1999.
99. So when did Circle of Snakes come out? Is that 2002?
Maybe. Let's see.
Maybe that was it. But Satan's Child, it started to step away.
777 was 2002.
Okay, so so that was
sorry.
Yes, sevens. Yeah, so that was what, Circle of Snakes, or was that 8?
Circle of Snakes came out in 2004.
So that was the 9th album.
Yeah,
8th album. So Satan's Child started to step away from the techno, because Black Acid was all techno,
right?
Or all synthy or whatever, industrial metal, and then Satan's Child started to step away from that. But by the time the 777 came out, I felt like he had finally returned to a heavy, more traditional metal, guitar-based, no keyboards kind of thing. And there was some really good stuff on that. And then, again, he's now, like I said, I don't know if it's necessarily a genre change that he's going through, or if it's just that he's getting old. But like you've observed, there is a definite lack of energy on the back end of his albums.
Yeah, you're like 3 songs in, and you're like, hey, this is not bad. I don't know why I'm not listening. Oh, what's this? Oh, this isn't really. But I mean, the guy has other concerns. I'm actually going to defer to you because I don't know as much about this. His actual comic company, which is, am I saying, is it Verotic?
Yeah, Verotic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that?
My only time ever meeting Glenn Danzig in person.
Oh, you've met the man.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Sorry, I didn't mean to drop this on you.
Way to bury the lead.
Yeah.
2 hours in.
Was in 1998, and it was after the launch of Verotic Comics, and he was touring on Ozfest.
Okay.
And it was actually after Danzig 5 had come out, and he was playing the Tacoma Dome with Ozzy on Ozfest and all that stuff, and he had done a signing at my local comic book shop, Action City Comics in Federal Way, which is still there, and he came in promoting his book, and he was actually, despite what we've talked about a lot earlier in this conversation about him being a Goomba and a jerk, he was actually a very gracious dude and very cool to everybody who came in. And he made it clear, he was on KISW the day before saying, you know what, if you bring stuff down, I'll sign it. I'll sign Misfits stuff. And this is all, again, right around the same time that they just got over the big contentious legal battle, and the Misfits were back out on the scene putting out music. He's like, I'll sign Misfits stuff. I'll sign whatever you got. He goes, just come buy a couple of comics and support my thing, right? So myself and several of my friends who are huge fans, we all got in line, stood in line. It was in October, I believe. And, we went through, got our pictures taken with him, and he was totally cool. And we were just like, hey, nice to meet you. And he's like, yeah, it's good to be here. And he was totally not the person that you see on the videos and in the interviews. It was very much like we talked about. It was old Glenn, like young Glenn. You could tell the comic book thing to him clearly has been an important part of his life for his whole life. And so starting a comic book company probably gave him a bigger thrill at that point in his life than putting out another album in a way. Right. So he was very enthusiastic about it. And it was really kind of a fun evening to hang out with him. But the company itself, Verotic Comics, started off very strong. It had some really great, tie-ins with famous artists. Simon Bisley, deeply involved in the company, did a lot of the covers, did a lot of the art. He did a licensing agreement with Frank Frazetta and did a comic book about Death Dealer, which was a painting basically that Frazetta did. It was a dark figure on a horseback with a huge axe and a horned helmet and red eyes. And he called it the painting Death Dealer. And so they did a comic based on that painting. And so Frazetta painted all the covers for it. He did a series of paintings.
I might have seen the original of that recently.
And then there was a whole thing again where the company was kind of run the way Danzig runs his music.
Oh.
He writes all the stories, and then he hires people to do the art. And all the stories were dark horror, dark erotica, a lot of S&M themed stuff, a lot of sex, a lot of violence. There was actually a local artist here in Seattle did a series called Sunglasses After Dark, which is about vampires and vampire hunters. And there's a series, Grub Girl, who is like a zombie prostitute. And there's Venus Domina, who is an alien dominatrix who draws her power from your pain kind of thing. And she has like 6 vaginas. And, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry.
Yeah, they're all in her rib cage. Anyway, yeah.
Oh.
And then there's like the satanic stuff. I believe it's Dalkiel. It's Dalkiel. And he's like this demon. And that to me was probably the best comic of the lot that he put out because it was drawn by Simon Bisley, so the art was amazing.
Okay.
And the story was actually kind of interesting. Dalkiel is like Satan's right hand.
Okay.
He's like this hit demon or whatever. He's like this super, hardcore demon guy. But he has a taste for the human ladies, right? And Satan sort of has this prophecy about how this hybrid person is going to come and overthrow his kingdom or whatever. And so he forbids Dalkiel from going out with the ladies, but then he's going out with the ladies. So there's a lot of demon sex and all that stuff. But it's sort of an interesting story. But the art, again, because it was Simon Bisley, was fantastic. I mean, he had just come off that great run with Lobo and, just really, really top shelf. And then he did one called The Inquisitor, which was it was a one-shot off of a minor character in the Dalkiel. He's the Inquisitor of Hell. And it's like, he goes around, enforcing Satan's law, and anyway, but that one was also done by Bisley, so it was very good. There was a thing called, it was like Verotica, which was sort of a monthly, but it was like 2 or 3 short stories in a comic, and that featured guest writers and other artists. But the thing, I don't know exactly what happened, well, other than the fact that I don't really think that a lot of the comics were very good. Sunglasses After Dark was great. Like I said, the Dalkiel was good. The Grub Girl, the other stuff, Venus Domina, that was all kind of eh. He had done a Devilman comic based on the Japanese cartoon, so he licensed that, ran that. That one was okay. There was Jaguar God, which was another one, but none of his stuff lasted more than 4 or 5 issues of the shorter stories, or of the independent characters. Like, I think Venus Domina went like 11 issues. Jaguar God was like 6. Death Dealer was like 5. So after his first year of publishing, really the only thing that was coming out was the Verotica Monthly. And so his titles disappeared, and I don't think he ever got anybody interested in working for him or doing more original stories or whatnot, or he got bored with it, because it's like they went from a lot of production of multiple titles down to nothing in the course of maybe 2 years. And I know he got into a big deal with Frank Frazetta, and they had a falling out. And so, and again, Danzig has a falling out with someone on his creative team, and there's a lawsuit. What? This is the theme, right?
Yeah. I think
that happened, and and I mean, they put out some figures, and they put out some statues, and then they did multiple covers. He also did a couple of compilations of pinup art from a guy called Wingbird, who does, again, anime style bondage art. And so they did some of these things, and they kind of branched across genres. He was putting out anime stuff and then other art, and then it just sort of disappeared. But now his empire, Danzig's empire, has been consolidated into one website. It's called Danzig Verotica. You go on the website, and you can either click on the Danzig thing and do the music stuff, or you can click on the Verotic thing and do the comic stuff. And if you go into his store, he still sells the comics. And he keeps occasionally posting, oh, we've got a new fan cover for, Devil Girl 1 or whatever. And so he's like repopping his comics with different covers done by either more famous artists or people you might know in the comic book business, but there's no new content coming out. But he keeps it up and keeps it going. And so it's very strange. Like, I don't know if it's something he lost the energy in, or if he didn't have the response that he wanted early on and he just kind of just said, oh, whatever, and like left it. I really don't understand. But, and again, he's a guy who doesn't really talk about his business dealings very much.
Right, he wouldn't want to.
Right. So, but it's still there. And there's been talk about two of the titles. Actually, one is, I think they were making a softcore porn out of Grub Girl. And then there was another one that's supposed to be, that I was just reading about the other day, that one of the other titles is supposed to be turned into a cartoon. So like an animated series or whatever. But again, it's these things that he created, they're all, again, some of them are good and some of them are just weird and out there. But it's this weird company in stasis right now. And I don't know where it's going or what the future is for it. But I mean, I enjoyed some of the comics. The guy who did a lot of the cover art is the guy who did the Sam Hain box set cover art.
Okay, I don't know if I ever saw the box.
Okay, so it's got the lady.
I should look it up.
So remember the original album, there was sort of that pen and ink sort of drawing of the naked lady with the skull face.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it's an updated version of that. It's done. It's a very graphic style, yeah. So it's sort of a sketchy, it's black and white.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that. So that guy who did that cover, he also did, so Danzig, around that same time, had signed or created another music label or something, and he re-released a lot of his albums with different cover art done by that same guy. Okay. So Satan's Child got a new cover. A couple of other albums got new covers done by that guy, but that guy did a lot of the cover art for the comic books, and he and Bisley and him still do things. Like Bisley did the cover of the Lost Tracks. He did the cover art for the lyric book that he put out a while ago, the Legends of the Left Hand or whatever it's called, and then he also did the sketch cover. It's very sketchy, but the original art for Danzig, was it 6? Yeah, Satan's Child, where it looks like the demon Danzig standing in a pool of green or whatever. Like that was a Bisley art. But so he's had these things with Bisley from time to time. He had done the painting for the cover of Thrall Demon Sweat, but Bisley is a very high demand, high cost artist nowadays, and he's very well respected in the world of comic books, and so I don't know if maybe Danzig was paying him enough, but he came on and did a couple of things and then disappeared. The big Frazetta lawsuit, so all the high power talent disappeared from his comic company. And if you go and you look at some of the other comic books, the art is not that great. And so I've always had this thing with comic books. If you're going to carry bad art, you have to have an excellent story, or if you're going to have a bad story, you have to have excellent art, because if you have bad art and a bad story, you just got crap.
Yeah.
And I think that it started to go in the crap direction, and maybe to Danzig's credit, he cut it off before it got too far down that rabbit hole and just said, hey, look, I got this thing. We made a lunchbox, and it's cool, right?
Right.
There was some merchandising there. But I would like to see, and I think maybe this also, again, speaks to Danzig, the person, I would like to see his company run by somebody else and have it be an independent comic publisher. But he's pigeonholed himself in this thing, like, we're Verotic, it's violent erotica, right? And we're going to do this Satan, death, crazy vagina on your forehead, dominatrix from space stuff. And it's like, maybe you should just get some people who want to do horror comics, right? And then they can release through your deal. But he had a very specific thing, and it also reminds me, in the Sam Hain box set, he did a comic. So Glenn wrote a comic, and it's a little short thing, and it's Glenn on tour with Sam Hain, and he's having sex with some chick who's a groupie, and then he turns into the beast with the horns, and she explodes and dies, and then he wakes up at the end. He's like, "Whoa, that was a fucking dream from hell, yo."
It's the last time I'm eating nachos before I go to bed.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right? Yeah, it's like one of those things. Yeah.
Oh man,
yeah, the chicken palm didn't deal.
Obviously,
well,
obviously, well, not obviously, but suspiciously, I'm wondering if maybe Verotic is his kind of like low key way of like, hey, this is what I'm into sexually. Let's just make a comic out of it.
Well, I don't know if it's just that though, because again, to circle back on the video thing, as you go through the videos as they go later on into later albums, there's a lot more S&M imagery. There, I mean, he's got one where they're showing medical videos of penis bifurcation and like all this stuff, and like you're just like, what the hell?
Didn't the Butthole Surfers used to do that back in the day?
Yeah, back in the
like when they used to show like medical videos during their shows.
Yeah.
I think that was one of their famous ones. Like, there's a guy's pecker cut in half
pretty much
on
like,
a video.
He did a whole thing where there's, like there's the the kitten one. What's that one? Wicked Pussycat. Where he's got a girl, dressed up like Catwoman, kind of, and she's crawling around with a leash and all this stuff. And it's like, clearly, there's some imagery there. But then if you go back to the She Rides video,
yeah,
he's wearing handcuffs or he's cuffed.
Yeah, there's always been people being constricted in his imagery. I mean, I think that's, it's funny. I mean, he's just being more explicit about it. It's kind of like that story about the guy and I can't remember his name, the guy that invented Wonder Woman.
Oh, yeah.
And his whole thing with that. People don't realize that the magic lariat, the truth lariat is really his kind of little tip of the hat to his bondage and polyamorous lifestyle that he had. But yeah, I mean, I guess we should probably wrap it up. But I will say this, and it just occurred to me, because I feel like, we've been picking on Glenn a little bit tonight. But I will say that dollars to donuts that like say Glenn Danzig is like always cooler than Rob Zombie.
Always.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was thinking about like, is there anybody else that kind of tried to push forward a similar thing? Alice Cooper did, but he abandoned it by 79. And really, it's Rob Zombie tried it a little bit, but it's like I've never gelled with Rob Zombie's music or his imagery or his movies, and it's like I've always felt like. And I was actually watching a thing today, getting ready. It was Rob Zombie with White Zombie ranking on Danzig for having a dumb video, and I'm just like, really, Rob?
Living Dead Girl, what?
Yeah, like really, Rob?
Dragula,
really,
what?
Really, Rob?
Yeah,
you've got a lot of talk, but yeah, I know.
It is interesting. Yeah, like you say, we have fun at Glenn's expense, but it's also one of those things, you make fun of those you love or whatever. Danzig's music and all of its genres and formats, whether it be the Misfits or the current iteration, has always had a very prominent place in my rotation, and it's been very influential in my life, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. And like you say, he's still cooler than a lot of people, and it's funny to see him, and maybe this is a good thing to end on, but his stuff is starting to come back and matriculate into the cool culture. Like there was last year, there was a Sailor Jerry rum ad on TV.
Oh yeah,
that featured "Where Eagles Dare," which is the old Misfits song.
Oh yeah,
I ain't no goddamn son of a bitch. Right, like it was this full-on. They had the TV edit, and then they had the one you could go watch on the internet, which was much longer and it had the full cursing and all stuff. But it was like Sailor Jerry, right, who is now this icon of cool.
I think he's been dead for 30 years, but
but he's an icon of cool, right? And his resurgence or whatever as a brand in this new kind of like we talked about, this new tattooed hip culture that we have, where everybody's kind of retro cool. But pairing that with the Misfits and rebringing that out and seeing it's the people, I guess, maybe who are our age, who were influenced by that stuff, who are now, like you say, off being the executives and doing the thing. They're reaching into their bag and they're saying this was cool and this is still cool, and we can get the young kids today to get back into the cool, quote unquote, by using his music and whatnot. And so he is getting his due, and it's nice as he's getting his due in his lifetime.
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. It's like, so many times these people, like, going outside of the genres, like a Nick Drake or whatever, they don't ever get their due until they're dead. And, you're right. I've noticed things, too. It's like, now, well, we were talking about this a long time ago, but there was a show, is it Jerry and Glenn are doing shows, or did...
It's Jerry, Glenn, and Doyle.
Okay.
They've done 2 or 3. The first one was Riot Fest in Chicago last September 2017 or 2016, and then they just played another one, I think, in Vegas.
And
the Vegas one's coming up.
Yeah.
They played 3.
And I see friends like on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, like millennial younger friends of mine that are like going like, I don't want to get tickets for this, or it's too expensive. But the truth is they're not going as a joke. Right. And they're like, and I think that's good. I mean, even, like I said, we've taken the piss out of them all this evening, but the truth is that it's like doing the research for this is like, I have touched into some of his stuff, and it's like, yeah, that music's still good. And, any jokes about his aesthetic or whatever, it's like, whatever. That is, if you're in the mood for, like, good, hard blues-based rock, then you gotta avoid that Black Acid Evil or Devil or however thing. But, those... I would dip my toes... I'm still not a huge fan of Sam Hain. I tried it, and it's a mess. But the Misfits and Danzig, it's like... And even the Michael Graves Misfits, to be honest... Some of the ones, I was like, I listened to some of it and it didn't connect with me, but then there's some of them, I'm like, this is actually pretty good. It's not musically what I think of as the Misfits, but it's good, powerful rock. And
that's sort of, I think that the Michael Graves Misfits is sort of an outcropping of something that you and I have talked about off, radio or whatever, but the Christ the Conqueror years,
yes,
right, where they were trying to make it as a Christian metal band while they were waiting for the Misfits lawsuit to they brought some more of a metal flavor, at least with the American Psycho album, and then it became a little more misfitty on the Famous Monsters. Mm-hmm. And then Michael Graves left, and then it got weird.
Yeah, we had that 1951 at the store I was in, and I was like, oh, this looks cool. I mean, he's going back to the original kind of look. It's like this Michael Graves guy, this interloper's gone, and I put it on, and I'm like...
It was just a bunch of cover songs.
It was dumb, and it was like there was a math problem in the booklet where he's like, in 1951, this plus this is what rock and roll is, and you're like... Okay, I mean, then there's that band Ball.
Well, that album is what killed the modern Misfits too, is because that's when Doyle left, and he said these guys don't want to do anything new. They're not progressing as a band. They're going and doing these cover things. That's like when the Nutley Brass one came out. Nutley Brass covers the Misfits. It's like, and it's a synth brass band. Again, dudes from New Jersey, right? And they're covering Misfit songs, and they're trying to make them like almost loungy. It's like and like the cover has got the Crimson Ghost wearing a fez, and it's like it was that whole kind of Mondo Exotica thing.
I like that stuff, but let's not cross the streams.
Yeah,
you're not the Phantom Surfers. All
exactly, but it was But I think that that 1950 thing was very weird. It was like a double disc set of cover songs and other oddities that. And like you say, lecturing us about the history of rock, like you somehow invented it, and that we've forgotten.
Just because you were born in 1951.
Exactly.
No, but I mean, did you ever gotten into that Japanese band? They're not really a tribute band, but it's almost like they took the Misfits and they just built. They're called Balzac.
Balzac, yeah,
they're pretty good.
They're actually really good. And then when they did the cover, they did the Switcheroo album. So there was a single that came out.
Okay.
And Misfits did a Balzac song.
Oh, yeah.
And Balzac did a Misfits song. That was actually really well done.
What song did they do? I forget.
They did The Day the Earth Caught Fire.
Oh, okay, so yeah, it probably didn't listen to it because it's like, back then I would be like, new Misfits, not listening.
Yeah, it was one of those things. But yeah, Balzac, they're sort of a weird quasi... Japanese tribute band to the Misfits because they all wear the skeleton outfits and they all have the comb-overs, but they make their own music.
Right.
So they have the visuals of the Misfits. And then there's, of course, one of my favorite bands of all time, they're now known as the Bitch Fits. But they used to be called the Misfits, and it was MS.Fits.
Okay.
Like the Mrs. Fits, the Misfits.
Okay, so
right? And it's an all female Misfits cover band from SoCal.
Wow.
And they are good.
I've never I don't think I've ever. I mean, I know there's been a lot of Misfits cover bands.
There's a lot of Misfits cover songs floating around, but
Yeah.
they like their whole thing is they just do Misfits songs, but they are good, and they've got the look down. I mean, it's a cover tribute band, but they're solid. They're really solid.
Sure.
Check them out.
Okay. I was trying to remember a story, but I don't only half remember about a comedian friend of mine that may have almost gotten in a fight with a Misfits cover band one time, but
nice.
In Eugene, but I don't know much about it. But I think we'll wind up there. I only have one last thing to say, and it's because it's not even that good of a story, because it's better. Your story about meeting the man is better.
Oh, jeez.
But this is apocryphal. But and again, I'm gonna probably picking on Glenn. But when I was like 18, a friend of mine in college told me this story because he was friendly with Matt Lukin, who's the bass player of the Melvins for a while, and he was with Mudhoney, and now I think he's out of the music business. But he was a great rock storyteller. But apparently, years ago, Mudhoney was playing a festival in England or somewhere in Europe or something, and Danzig was on the bill, and he was like, "I'm a huge Misfits fan. I gotta go knock on the door and go meet the man." And how he tells it, and again, this is apocryphal. I didn't hear it from the man himself. I heard it secondhand, so don't sue me. Is that when he walked in the door, Glenn was standing in the middle of a room, with his, that weird hand thing he wears, his hand cover, and he's shirtless. And he's like going like he's hunched over, and he's like punching the air. And there was like 3 or 4 guys around him going, "You're buff! You're buff! You're buff!" And he's like, "Yeah! Yeah!" And like they were psyching him up before the show. And so now, I don't know if this is true. It's probably not, but it's like that's my only great apocryphal Glenn Danzig show. He likes to get pumped up before a show by getting complimented. Extremely.
Well, it's not entirely beyond the realm of possibility, because if you go back and you watch the Danzig home video, the first one, there's a whole section of that, and of course that comes from the great era of rock bands putting out videos that have all this behind the scenes expose.
Yeah, you get to like
live a life of
the life of the rock and roll star.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that where he's behind, like before he goes on stage and he's putting on his glove things. And he's telling some guy, "Yeah, I was going to get some, like a lead pipe and put it in here so I could just, like punch a dude and watch his jaw fall off." And it's like, it's terrible stuff. But then you see him going through the stadium before and after performances, and he has this entourage of Goomba dudes, like super bodyguards. He's like, and they're all 6'5" and they're ripped, and they make him look even tinier, right? And this is still early. This is still early on, where Glenn wasn't entirely puffed up yet.
Okay.
He's buff, but he's not like super huge.
Like the Mother 94 muscles.
It's before, absolutely. It's before the lats from hell or whatever. But I could totally, I could buy that story. I could totally buy that story.
Yeah.
And then one last thing about stories of stories. When I was in West Virginia working for Amazon, I had a lady who worked for me who was also a huge Danzig fan. And she had gone to a show and actually wound up backstage.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like trying to put the biz on her, like trying to get her to get back to the tour bus and all stuff. And she's like, and she was talking about how, a big fan, listened to you for years. And this was in like 2000-ish, around there. And, and she was, I don't know, maybe, I want to say, probably early 30s, maybe late 20s, whatever, at the time. And she was saying, "Oh yeah, when I was young, Glenn, you were just like this great fantasy of mine." You're like, and he's like, "Well, yeah, you want to, like go back to the bus and stuff." And she's like, "No." And the funny thing is, this is what she relayed to me. But she was like, "No, I'm beyond that now. It's just really cool to meet you or whatever." And he's just like,
"Oh, poor guy."
I know. I'm like, you. And I gave her shit about that all the time. I was like,
you could have had his baby. You could have had Satan's Child.
Satan's Child, baby. You could have had the album and everything.
Well, that's, rock is dead. Long live rock.
That's right.
And long live Danzig.
When Glenn can't even pull a groupie anymore. I know. Such the end of an era.
Well,
on that note,
thank you for listening. You got anything you want to promote?
Yes, actually. If I am the principal artist on a comic book called Pax Serpentis that is released by Prometheus's Fire Publishing, which is a Washington locally owned and operated comic book company. We have local artists and writers, and we are going to be at the Jet City Comic Show in Tacoma, Washington, November 4th and 5th. I will be there. My creative colleagues will be there. We'll be selling our comics and promoting our art. Come by, say hi. Talk to me about Danzig. And we can, commiserate and laugh and cry together about the fiendish Fozzie and the evil Elvis. So.
Or you can you could probably buy this online too, because we have people that probably won't be able to.
That's true. You can find us on Facebook at Prometheus's Fire Publishing, or you can find me, Sean Judy, on Facebook. There'll be links there. I am an infrequent Twitter user, but you can find me at the Sean Judy. SEANJUDY, for those of you who are not reading the liner notes. Love to hear from you. Love to hear some feedback about Danzig and your Danzig experience.
Yes, I'm just gonna be mysterious.
Hi, Glenn. You just finished off the show at the North Stage. So how is it over there? How are things over there?
Crazy.
Crazy? Yeah. You're a real big Sinead O'Connor fan, I understand, huh? Tell me.
No.
No, you're not? Why not?
I don't like bullshit.
You don't like bullshit? Well, I must say what I liked about this festival was that the people seemed to be very open-minded. They seemed to accept something like Sinead O'Connor and heavy bands like Rollins Band and Biohazard and your band and a folk band like the Levelers. What do you think of that?
I don't know anything about the Levelers. I just know I don't like Sinead O'Connor.
Just because you think it's bullshit?
Yeah.
Oh, well. There's no particular reason.
Insincere.
You think it's insincere?
Yep.
Oh, shit.